afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to now call to order this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. It is 1 p.m. We're on the record today from 1 to 4. It's a ceiling, of course, not a target. It is April 16, 2025. I'll go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Member Myers.
Here.
Member Martinez.
Present.
Member Littlefield.
Here.
Member Rivera.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Here.
Chair Constant.
Here.
Vice Chair Zolotov.
Here.
Member Bronga.
Here.
Member Boland.
Happy to be here.
Member Brawley.
Here.
Member Salt.
Here.
Member Presverdia.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Anyone clerk, now ask Mr. Littlefield to please lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Member Brown, would you please read the pledge?
Yes, Chair. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the Indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for past and present Indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movements toward decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you, Member Bronga. All right, so a few starting comments. We have 16 items to accomplish today. We are on the record for 3 hours. I'm hopeful we can get through them in that amount of time, but if not, I'm also hopeful we will continue to work until the work is done. With that said then, the challenge, of course, in this room, including the in chambers, is every divided vote has to be recorded by a voice vote. And so I'm going to lean heavily on unanimous consent requests in today's meeting. Obviously, that doesn't foreclose any member from having an objection and speaking to an item in whatever manner that they want, or within the rules, or that the members can't fully and robustly debate any of the items on the agenda. It's just going to be challenging to get new work. We have to take tons and tons of votes. Some of these items will require it. So that is just my predicate to the conversation. And with that, then we have a request to change order today. Ms. Zolotov.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I move to change the order of the day to take up item 5A, 4B, 4E, 5B, 4D, 5C, then the remainder of the agenda, ending with item 4A.
Second. Can you say that one more time? So the motion to amend by Ms. Zolotov, seconded by Mr. Wong. I got 5A, 4B, and then
4E as in echo, 5B as in Bravo, 4D, 5C, the remainder of the agenda, and take up 4A after 5L.
all right. So Madam Clerk, did you get that? So there's a motion to change the order of the day made by Ms. Zolotov in order to reorganize some items so they can be taken up properly and in the right order. Second, Mr. Wong, is there any objection to the motion to change the order of the day?
I don't want to object, but I want to know why.
Yep. So this lets us take up the court items in the proper order, ensuring that we take up the revenue question before the contract question. Then there are 2 items where the action requested is to postpone them indefinitely. And then it moves through to take up the waste to energy just before, so it's just basically putting the waste to energy at the end of what's basically the enterprise and utility section of our agenda today, and then down the rest of the row, with 4A one I have a conflict on, so putting it towards the end of the agenda.
Okay. That's the why. Is there any objection to that motion? Hearing seeing no objection, the agenda's order has been changed. I would also note that the mayor is with us, the manager, the chief administrative officer, and the municipal attorney, who's also here at the table in a room full of people. Okay, so Next up, we will take up item 5A. Item 5A is AO 2025-47, an ordinance of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, providing for, authorizing, and approving the issuance of port revenue bonds and or notes for the municipality in one or more series in the aggregate principal amount outstanding at any time not to exceed $1,102,735,000 for the purpose of providing funds to refinance certain outstanding debt and to provide for additional funds for future capital improvements and related financing expenses. The Port of Alaska, and appropriating the proceeds of such bonds and or notes to the Port of Alaska Capital Improvement Fund 570800. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone wish to be heard on this item? If you do wish to be heard, please come forward to the lectern. We will have a mic. Anyway. Seeing hearing none, public hearing on this item is now closed. What's the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second. Motion to approve by Ms. Salatel, second by Mr. Myers. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. So I heard the chair sigh when he read that number. It is a big number, but it is necessary. This is a necessary move for us as a municipality in order to move on with the next item, which is looking at Terminal 1 cargo replacement. If you've been on the journey of the port for the past decade or so, you will know that these two actions today actually represent significant milestones. And we've had a number of significant milestones over the past couple of years. There's real momentum behind this project. And so while this is a large amount of revenue bonds, I want to point out a few things. One, these are not bonds like our traditional bonds that go on the ballot. These are bonds that are paid with something called a surcharge on our tariff. Yes, if these bonds are ultimately still authorized by the Assembly in the future to be sold on the market, those tariff surcharges do pass on to consumers. But this does not preclude what the municipality has been very successful at to date with the port modernization project or program, which is getting other funding. We have already replaced one of the terminals in the port modernization program called the Petroleum Cement Terminal. That was an expensive terminal, but to the tune of just over, I believe, $12 million to the municipality. It was a very small contribution by residents of the state of Alaska to the overall program. I have high expectations for this as well. There are some grant funds we continue to expend, but the real piece to this is, and the reason there is that big number, is to assure our contractor that we are walking in partnership, that we are going to see the Terminal 1 construction through to the end. This number also gives us room to remain agile and pivot in that construction process. I think everyone can understand that there's a little uncertainty in the world, but we are prepared and we have lots of opportunities to move with whatever those circumstances may be. I also want to reinforce, we have a really great relationship with our federal delegation and continue to talk about the importance of the port modernization program, not just to Anchorage, but to the entire state. We also continue to have a really great relationship with the Anchorage caucus of the Alaska legislature going to bat for this program. So what I want to let the public know is you should absolutely be paying attention to the port. If you've ever been at one of my community council meetings, you hear me talk about the port. It is one of the most significant pieces of infrastructure we have in our town, and it is one of the most significant pieces of infrastructure for the state. So I am very proud today to cast my vote in favor of this and the next item, knowing that the municipality is stepping up to make sure that infrastructure works. It is future-proofed, and it is resilient for whatever the future may bring. So I would ask my colleagues' support. Thank you.
The clerk reminds me that there is an AIM associated with this item 4B1. Wait, I'm sorry. Is there an AIM associated with this one? It's not listed on my list.
Through the chair, it's the bond market volatility.
Okay, it's not on my list, so I didn't catch it. Okay, so it is unnumbered AM from the mayor, bond market volatility is the title that will be associated with this item. All right, so So, next, does the administration wish to chime in on this item now at all before we move into more deliberation?
To the chair, I'll say that our comments are largely aligned with Vice Chair Sal. I think this is a very significant development, but it is also one that is not wholly new. This is very similar to an action the Assembly took last February to authorize bonds, which effectively creates a budget. This new item aligns with the plan of finance that we published in January for the whole of Cargo Terminal 1 and the whole of Cargo Terminal 2. One thing that I would also add to give the members of the public and any other interested parties some perspective is that while this creates the budget for us, this itself, despite having a big number on the first title page, doesn't have summary of economic effects because it doesn't actually authorize the issuance of any bonds until the Assembly comes back and says we specifically authorize a particular issuance of bonds. And for those who are playing along with the written materials, that is at the very top of page 10, Assembly approval of bonds. So this creates the ability for us to move forward, but does not immediately result in wholly economic impact.
And Mr. Chairman, I add one further thing for the record, just because I received questions from the public about this, and I'd like to say it publicly regarding the order of the day, just to make clear that this passage of this ordinance is a prerequisite to award of the Terminal 1 contract. And the reason for the timing of those items being introduced last week and coming before the body this week, and the ordering today, having this ordinance go first, is because a portion of this additional bonding authority is a prerequisite to being able to award the Terminal 1 construction contract.
And that was Fawzi, this one because of the record. Okay, anyone else wish to discuss this item? Okay, I'll just note that this has been an ongoing project for generations, and the Bergwitz administration, some members of the Assembly, including the now mayor, set to task and hired a contractor, our friend Roger Deluski, who really helped us to look at this process, look holistically at the prospects of this effort. And I think that that moment was a true turning point in moving us to where we are today. And there has been a steady hand on the till by both the Assembly and the administration, but for a little bit of a window, previous administration questions. So this work is not the conclusion of a rapid finish to get things done really quickly. This is literally like an 8-year effort that is landing today. And so for those who feel that this might have some kind of time pressure, the time pressure is not about getting something done for anything other than we've been working on this trajectory for years, and here we are now ready to proceed to the next phase. And this gives certainty to the plan of finance, basic plan of finance. So with that end, if there's no one else, members, I would like to ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection to this motion? Anyone on the phone with objections? No objections are heard. By unanimous vote of the Assembly. AO 2025-47 has passed. Next, we'll take up item 4B. Item 4B is Summary Memorandum 327-2025, recommendation of award to Lance and Michael Joint Venture, MJE, for construction services for Terminal 1, replacement under the Port of Alaska Modernization Program. This item is not a public hearing item, so I will go ahead and turn to the body. What's the will of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Ms. Salatel, seconded by Ms. Farley. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My prior comments really do apply to this. This is a really important piece to the Port Modernization Program, Port of Alaska Modernization Program, and I want to just take a moment and pause, and there's some things that's needed to get to this. Previous port leadership, Sharon We had a good partnership with the last administration. Thank you to Mr. Halsey, Ms. McPherson, and Mayor LaFrance for keeping us on target in a clear priority. Again, and thank you to Jacobs for being a good partner in this and explaining the technical aspects of this to us as policymakers so we understand the decision points. I also want to thank Toad Matson and the rest of the operators at the port. This has really been a collaborative conversation. Mr. Constant alluded to it earlier, but the Design Advisory Board has played an integral role in moving decisions through. And it was really through lessons learned from when we did the petroleum cement terminal. So I look forward with the revamped Design Advisory Board as we move through and any questions come up. I feel like we're in a really solid position to be agile with anything that may come up through this process. And then with that, in the name of agility, I would like to go ahead and move amendment number 1.
Second.
There's a motion to amend by Ms. Zalato and a second by Ms. Marley. Ms. Zalato.
Thank you. So what this does is it increases the change order authority to $26 million or 3.2%. This is still within the bonded revenue bond amount we just previously approved. I feel more comfortable putting this project on a trajectory so it can be agile. We do not 100% know what various markets are going to do as we go through procurement, and we have a lot of pieces moving here. And the idea is, with this change order authority, this project has been really good at briefing the assembly, but it leads them to be agile to respond to those conditions that may arise. So I would request your support in this. This is a big contract, and its change order authority should be similarly situated. Thank you.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, question. So I see this came from the municipal manager, so I'll direct my questions towards Ms. McPherson. In the change order 30, 1.5% had been the amount in there. Is that our standard practice? Are we deviating from it, or is that sort of a number that varies depending on from contract to contract?
Through the chair, Member Johnson, my understanding from all of our contracting, for all of our construction experts, is that the 3.2% number that is included in the amendment is more typical, and particularly more typical for the first few years of a project in which there is more likelihood of needing to be agile and having some pricing volatility. The initial number presented was lower than that to try and keep a tighter leash on the contract. The question here, this amendment is really if the body is amenable to having us take a more traditional path of having something closer to that 3.2% rather than the 1.5% included in the authority from the outset.
Thank you, I appreciate that answer. And then follow-up question, if this amendment is adopted as written, can you just kind of walk us through a little bit when, if the administration would have to come back to the assembly for approval and changes to the contract?
Through the chair, Member Johnson, we would, if we were to receive the contract against the change order authority, then we would come back for a request for an increase. And we would anticipate, this was a projection that we would anticipate would take us at least through the first year of the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Any discussion on the amendment? So I would know, my impression of this was that if you followed the conversations in email about the call it bond for construction, surety bond, or the amount that the contractor has to put on the table just to be able to bid, it was in this range of magnitudes, $22 million. And so the reality is this project is so big, while these numbers look giant, these numbers are actually pretty standard. And so just off of that. Just by percentage. Nothing standard about such a large scale project. But any further discussion on the amendment? I would like to ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the amendment? On the phone, any objection? Oh, Mr. Salt, I am hearing and seeing no objection, therefore the amendment is adopted unanimously. I also was told by the clerk and reminded that there is also an AIM associated with this item. I'm going to read now. It's item 4B1. Information memorandum on number Port Glass Modernization Program, Terminal 1 construction contract response to inquiry from Anchorage Assembly. I want to thank the clerk, or not the clerk, I want to thank the manager and administration officer for getting very detailed answers to lots of questions. So involved in red by some of us, please. Okay, so now we have the main motion as amended before us, Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that lead in. So obviously we've seen that there's protests from another bidder, and I know that delta is roughly 72 million, which I think is worth a few questions, which the administration has done a very good job of answering mine as well as the others. But I just wanted to offer, I guess, two options right here. One is for the administration just to speak to the protest, kind of the cost or uncertainty of not award today, their attempt to secure the mayor's response, as well as Mr. Falsey's response. And then if the other bidder or Birch Horton is in the room, just to me it seems, I'm just curious as to why the other bidder didn't put in a bid bond, which I believe has very low cost to, even for a large amount such as this, which I think was the reason for that bid being rejected. Thank you.
So I'll start by asking, is there a representative here from that organization? Mr. Salt, I'm not seeing anyone. So Ms. Falsey, do you want to with Kirsten, you'll have to take on a response.
Absolutely, through the chair, Member Salt. I'll start by talking a little bit about the time pressure of what happens if we delay the question, and then turn to Mr. Falsey to talk about the substantive response from the administration to the actual bid protest requests that we have received from the competing bidder. In terms of the time question, this is outlined in the written response as well. We run into a couple different things if we delay award of this contract. None of which are perfectly quantifiable. And the first thing we bump into is the fact that when we put out the RFP, we indicated that the limited notice to proceed date for this contract would be May 6th of 2025. And that is to allow the contractor sufficient time to procure long lead time items before commencing construction activity in the summer of 2026. And so if we are to pass that date or to not make the contract work prior to that date, the world doesn't end, but we end up potentially in a renegotiation situation because that date was something that the bidding contractors took into account in considering whether they were able to agree to the liquidated damages provisions in the contract, which are triggered by a delay in construction start time and delivery of certain key items under the contract. And so that starts to become a risk. We run into our second very concrete risk point at May 26th, because that is when the validity of the initial bid concludes. The contractor is bound to their bid for 90 days from the date of submission, and we hit that point at May 26th. After that date, we would potentially have to go out to rebid the contract, start the process over again. And for reference, I'd say we've now taken 8 months approximately between the date when we were to receive responses to our initial ITB and did not receive those. We went out for a rebid process, and it's taken us 8 months to get through it again. So it's not an insignificant amount of time that we would take and delay we would experience if we were to restart the bidding process at this point. Now I'll turn it to Mr. Falsey to speak specifically to the bid protest items in our response.
Thank you, Manager McPherson, and to the chair. To Member Solt, yes, it is true that we received some correspondence from a rival proponent. The first letter, which we've circulated to the Assembly along with our response, focused in the main on the bid bond requirement. There are several requirements for bonding that are associated with this project. The bid bond, as we discussed in the RFP itself, was required for the project to protect the municipality from financial risk. And as we described there, it ensured project continuity in the event of an unsuccessful negotiation. The way this project was structured, proponents could submit marked up versions of the contract that we would ultimately like to enter into. And the bid bond, as we said in the addendum, was intended to ensure that proposers submit serious and financially capable offers serve as a guarantee that the selected proposer will enter into negotiations with the MOA in good faith. It is a relatively common practice in construction projects to have a bid bond. There was back and forth with potentially with the proponent who ultimately submitted the protest letter itself about the propriety of using the bid bond here. We landed on the fact that we did indeed want one. What we ultimately received from them was a check, which turned out to be an uncertified company check, We then went to the bank to confirm that it was not a certified check, gave the proposer the opportunity to cure that, to either provide us with a certified check or with a bid bond. There was additional back and forth. Ultimately, they chose not to do that. At that point, we were really unable to move forward with that because it was a hard requirement of the request for proposals that proposers submit a bid bond to us. I'll say that at that point our hands were somewhat tied, and that was regrettable because of course we would have loved to consider the proposal as well. But I'm happy to answer further questions on that if there are further questions. Otherwise, we have tried to do this in a fulsome and forthright way by showing you all the cards as we're producing them. So we have sent our responses to all these different mailers to the assembly.
Appreciate it, Mr. Folsey. I did one follow-up question. In a secondary letter from their legal representative, they called out several deficiencies or concerns with MMJV's bid. I just want to know if any of those are material.
In our opinion, they are not. And so here too, we sent our response to the first letter on Monday, and at about the same time received the second letter from their legal counsel. We have just submitted our response to that letter from their legal counsel just ahead of this meeting, and CC all the assembly members, so you can see our full response there. But in the main, the short version is that the response that we received from Manson Michaels was, in our estimation, in all aspects responsive. The concerns that were being raised by Mr. Kylan Marine really went to kind of quality or scoring criteria type questions. So the requirement in the RFP, for example, may say, demonstrate to us how you will construct this project. And they, this is what we said, we take issue with some of the ways that they propose to construct the project. Well, that doesn't make the recommended authority's proposal non-responsive. It might go to how you would evaluate that. But certainly the evaluation committee concluded after its more technical and extensive review that the Manson Michael joint venture proposal would result in a project that will get us a new Terminal 1.
Thank you, Mr. Folsey, and thank you, Chair. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thanks. The bid bond requirement, so I'm just not sure, you're not going to construct till 2026. So is that money held by the municipality, or are you just seeing if they actually have these funds available? And then I'm wondering if potentially they could show you some money and then next year they wouldn't have that money. How do you ensure that they actually have these funds? Or maybe that's what the bid bond does. Sorry, I just don't understand it.
Through the chair to the member Brung, I can hazard at least a partial response to that. Yes, the initial bid bond is to demonstrate seriousness in the initial negotiations. It's a little bit, I think of it as a little bit like an earnest money payment in a real estate transaction. There are at least three ways that you can comply with that. One is to get an actual bid bond. Another was to send us a certified check. I'm forgetting as I try to pull up what the third way was. The certified check, of course, actually freezes the note-getting amount of money required by the bid bond. So in this instance, if someone had sent us a check for $22 million, the bank would have to certify that there was $22 million in the bank. It would not be moved until either that check was released or we cashed that check. The bid bond performs a similar function, but really doesn't require you to tie up the money in the same way. And if you were to just Google bid bonds, typically the bid bond cost is much less than the face value of the bond itself. We cannot say from our side of the table why this respondent was not able to submit a bid bond. We know that they didn't believe that this was the right tool to use. We were pretty well convinced from our experience and from the recommendation from our Jacobs contractor and from the expertise of the purchasing department that it was a standard and necessary tool for us to use. We also know that the recommended authority had no problem complying with it.
Appreciate that.
So I have myself in queue. I would take a little bit of a different read of what one thing you just said is not that they cannot. It's my read of the communication that was in a response that they will not. I didn't get it to cannot, they said they can. And so I think it's more clear to say they stated they will not meet this requirement. And so now I read your letter that you sent out this morning, and I think it addressed every concern that was in the list except one. Maybe you did, and I just didn't read it closely enough. It was their concern about community work concerns. And Do we have a response to that item? Is that similarly, those are qualitative concerns, not relative to whether or not the bidder is qualified?
And to the chair, the project is subject to community workforce agreement, which you're aware of, and so that negotiation will happen afterwards with the contractor concerning the project. And so I think their assertion was that there were somehow less local contractors available who would then be covered by the CWA. And the challenge there is that's not, I mean, it's certainly not a requirement. The project is required to have a CWA. That's been decided before we came into office. And so I think it's sort of, in some ways, a challenging item to respond to because the requirement is clear, they will comply with the requirement.
But ultimately, it's, again, not, it seems to fall, it just wasn't addressed into the category of that is not a disqualifying element, that is not an element of a responsible bid, that's more of the subjective analysis of the bid and how it is.
To the chair, absolutely. It's certainly not a qualifying requirement, and additionally, the CWA requirement will be met.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. And I will also say thank you for all the work that's been prepared. Specifically, I had some questions and was able to meet with the new manager yesterday and appreciate the information in writing. I also appreciate that we were given guidance on what the Assembly's ability to send things to the bid review board is. And so I contemplated that, looking at this particular case and just knowing the scope of that board. And I'll just say briefly, my understanding of that board is it is a narrow scope in which it is looking at essentially was the procurement process met. So there's not discretion there, it's really evaluating the process. And I may be messing up the technical terms, but essentially, and I've also been a contractor, certainly not anything of this magnitude, not building anything, but I have seen, non-responsive bidders, and I know that generally speaking in a procurement process, that is a hard rule. You either are responsive or you're not, and even if you meant to be, if you were not, then that is not a discretionary item. And so, so I just wanted to put on the record, at least that I had considered whether we should take that action or whether I should initiate that action, and concluded that it seems very unlikely that that board would come to a different conclusion or even come to different findings of fact, in which case it would really be an exercise of additional time and process but not change the outcome and not necessarily, just not change the outcome. And so at this point I would recommend to my colleagues, if anybody was contemplating that, to consider the time cost of that and whether it would produce a different result. And so I have no intention at this point to make that, nor have I been asked by any of your parties to do so. Thanks.
Any other discussion on the motion? Anyone on the phone? Seeing and hearing none on this item, I'm going to again ask for unanimous consent. To the members, is there any objection to the adoption of the motion? On the phone. I'm not seeing any objection. The motion has passed. A vote of 12 to 0. That's PAM 327-2025 as amended. Take a breath. Yep. Ms. Salto.
I would move to immediately reconsider.
Second.
So there's a motion to reconsider moved by Ms. Salto, second by Mr. Myers. You have a proposal, Ms. Salto?
No vote is urged.
No vote is urged. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing and hearing the discussion, I'm going to ask again. I don't know how to say it. Unanimous dissent. I'm going to go ahead and ask for unanimous dissent. Is there any objection to the motion? First time I've ever asked for unanimous dissent. Here we are. I am hearing and seeing no dissension. Therefore, the motion to reconsider has failed. Do we need to do that for the financial instrument?
Is there anything I do that's all?
Ms. Alto.
I move to reconsider item 5A.
So there is a motion to reconsider item 5A by Ms. Alto. Who's the second? Ms. Raleigh. In the same vein, I'd like to ask for unanimous dissent. Is there any objection to that motion? Anyone on the phone? Hearing no dissent, therefore the motion to reconsider has failed on item 5A.
Mr. Chair, may I
Ms.
have
Marion, you have the floor.
personal privilege?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of this body, not only for your unanimous approval and unanimous dissent, but for the way in which you have engaged in this project, for the way in which you have shepherded Ms. Elatel, Mr. Constance, and to our team as well, and those here in this room who have also played a really big part in what I believe to be this just feels like a historic move forward. And so thank you all so very much. I look forward to continuing to collaborate with all of you on this critical project, this critical program, series of projects. Thank you.
Never before has been voting on industrial infrastructure and emotional is today. Next we have item 4C. Item 4C is AM 339-2025, an memorandum of somebody authorized the creating of the municipality of Anchorage, Port Alaska, and Madison Navigation Company, Alaska LLC, state the terms and conditions for purchase of brewery cranes to be located at the Port Alaska Car Terminal. Result.
Second.
There's a motion to postpone indefinitely by Ms. Elatel, second by Mr. Myers. Result.
Thank you. I have Manager Vincent answer the question of why.
Ms. Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the Chair and Vice Chair Zalatel. So this agreement, this item and the next one that will come up are both tied to a paradigm of crane purchase and operation, which may be shifting slightly, only in the sense that Matson is now looking at different options for procuring cranes. The original intent was to procure them, I believe, from Japan, and they're now exploring options for utilizing used cranes from somewhere else, somewhere else within the Matson network. And so as a result, our paradigm, the contract terms may shift slightly because the other paradigm for how those cranes will arrive and be installed may change slightly. So as a result, we would like to ask that these two items be postponed indefinitely. At this time, we will resubmit. We will anticipate that we're going to resubmit two very similar items because the idea is not that the ongoing operating paradigm shifts in any way. The idea is that the timeline does not shift in any way. But the idea is that the location and type of sourcing that may be used to identify the cranes is intended to shift, and as a result, they may have some impact on contract terms. And so, again, as a result, our request is to postpone indefinitely and for us to reintroduce parallel items when Matson has determined how they'd like to proceed. And I know Matson's representative is in the audience too, but I can ask them to speak directly to this item.
It's essentially the same testimony for item 5B, right? Any discussion on motion to postpone indefinitely? And seeing none, members, I'm going to go ahead and ask for unanimous consent on motion to postpone indefinitely. Is there any objection to the motion to postpone indefinitely? I didn't hear any single objection, so item 4C and 339-2025 has been postponed indefinitely. Next up, item 5B. 5B is AO 2025-51, an ordinance named Assembly approving the crane use agreement between the municipality of Anchorage, Southern Port Alaska, Madison Navigation Company, Alaska LLC. Listen.
Second.
Moved by Zalatel, second by Mr. Myers. Discussion on motion. Previous testimony is the same. Item 4C. Listen. And heard. Seeing or none, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to the motion to postpone indefinitely. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, therefore, item 5B, AO 2025-51 is going to postpone indefinitely, which brings us back up to item 4D. Item 4D is AR 2025-126, a resolution of the municipality of Anchorage supporting establishing new waste energy project led by Solid Waste Services and supported by the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, both enterprise utilities, the municipality of Anchorage. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Johnson, second by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, I'll speak to why I'm excited for this prospect. There are, if we find that this is feasible, I mean, a lot of upsides to consider with the concept of waste energy facility. There are health benefits, there are environmental benefits. There is adding to our overall sources of energy, which is a very timely subject for municipality Anchorage as we contemplate not the same availability of natural gas as we've relied on years past. This has the potential to extend the life of our landfill, which we know is a major liability for the city. It is beneficial in terms of our ability to dispose of wastewater and the sludge associated with that. So there is a litany of potential upsides to this. Now, understanding that the feasibility of the project is a large project, it is a complex project. So this is not ultimately greenlighting the construction of anything. This is just simply laying a path forward to go forward and do more to determine the scope and the probability of success here. The monies for this, the project, which is supported by Solid Waste Services and AWU, are from their funds, so it does not have an impact to our general government spending. It is from their budgets, they have the capacity, and they have expressed their support for this project. So with that, I would just encourage my colleagues to support this.
Ms. Ellis.
Thanks. So I share Mr. Johnson's enthusiasm with the exploration of waste to energy, especially given the energy issues in South Central Alaska. I do want to raise a few things as I'll be leaving, but I would love to impart to my members to pay attention and watch for. I look at waste and energy not unlike our modernization program. It is a multi-phase project that will take lots of steps. And it is one where you'll have to dig in and from time to time and really understand sequentially where the effort is in order to be able to do the go, no-go decisions. And what I've learned through the PORT project and other significant infrastructure projects is that we typically have a member who does dig in deep and can be relied on. And I know Mr. Johnson is in on that, but I encourage you all to find a passion for waste to energy, to dig in on this project. And I know Ms. Toth and Mr. Spafford are ready to walk you through all of it. The $8 million that will come up in first quarter budget revisions, that's a lot for a preliminary investigation of a project. We have a feasibility study. I think if I were you, maybe at the next Enterprise Utilities Oversight Committee meeting or shortly thereafter, kind of start to get a project timeline on what steps you can expect to see when, so you can track it. And then the last thing I would say is whenever you're amassing a pot of money is to have someone keep track of where you're at in that pot of money. I had Mr. Rebuffo during the Port Modernization Program bring me a sheet of paper at the start of every Enterprise and Utilities meeting telling me kind of where we were in the plan of finance. So I think this is exciting, I think it's big, and I think it takes a lot of work, but I'm confident that the municipality and this body can see it through to some really great decision points, and then really communicate with the public about what this is. Waste to energy will be an education process with the public and how it can benefit them, what the potential drawbacks could be, and ultimately what it might mean on their bills. Because as we know, if we have to approve a rate increase on those bills, we hear about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Ellis, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the words of wisdom. I would also want to say thank you to Mr. Spafford and Ms. Toth. I know we have a lot of questions, and we're able to get those answered. And just again, making sure that we are being thoughtful and intentional about this, because I know it's picking up something that was started several years ago and then is getting back going. So it's helpful to make sure we have continuity. And I think one kind of thing to note in terms of difference, whereas the Port Modernization Project, it was very clear we have to do this. We have to figure out how to do it because we're replacing an asset. I think this one is different and will take a kind of slightly different type of shepherding through, which is we're looking at whether something, this new idea, not new to the rest of the world, but new to us idea is feasible and something that we should do. And so I think that's maybe just one nuance to put there, but I look forward to continuing to see how this project evolves, and hopefully we can bring it to fruition, because it seems like it would have a lot of benefits. Thank you.
I would just offer then, similarly to that, there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around the concept of what's possible, what's feasible, and what are we going to do. And in the context is it possible? That's a broader question that gets pretty yes or no pretty quickly. Is it feasible? It starts to analyze the costs, the cost benefits, various funding sources, how it will be done. And then the question of then should we do it is an action item that will eventually come before you or us on any number of these items. And I would point out that we have acronym soup here. We have the PAMP, or Alaska Modernization Project. We have this waste energy conversation. We have the stormwater utility, the SWU, and we have pump storage hydro. So we have PAMP, SWU, WTE, PSH. The point I'm making though is that there are a number of complex and potentially large projects going forward. We, in some ways, I think, just put forward the Port of Alaska modernization and to extent are going to the ground very soon. And these other three will continue to vie for your attention, and I'm hopeful that all three of those priorities find ground in this administration, meaningful ground. So with that, then anyone else on this item? Hearing and seeing none, I would like to go ahead and ask for unanimous consent to approve AR 2025-126. Is there an objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, that item is adopted and vote 12-0. Which now brings us to item 5C. So 5C is AO 2025-25, known as the Municipal Assembly amending Municipal Code Section 8.25.060 to expand the responsibility of parents, guardians, and minors possessing a weapon on school grounds or school functions. As the clerk note, it's the intended sponsor to postpone indefinitely this item and substitute with AR 2025-116. We looked closely at our procedures and determined that the last time, the first time we did this, we went ahead and read the items, which I'm going to read the additional items into the record, and then a motion was accepted to approve the resolution that was the substitute for the ordinance. Then the action after that would be to postpone indefinitely the ordinance. So I will go ahead and read the rest of the supplementary items that are in there. We have 5C2 information memorandum 67-5 Anchorage School Board letter support data 2025-5 ordinance to Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 8.25.060 to expand principal liability to parents, guardians, and minors possessing deadly weapons, school ground or school functions. Then we have AIM 5C3, AIM 68-2025 letter support from Education Chair of the National Association for the Advancement of Code People and NAACP Anchorage Branch for AO 2025 and AO 2025-28. Then we have item 5C4, resolution AR 2025-116, resolution in Anchorage Municipal Assembly calling a greater partnership between the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage, Anchorage School District, Anchorage Police Department, and our community at large to keep students in our schools and neighborhoods safe from violence. Then we have item 5C5, some information around 78-125, and then item 5C6, resolution AR 2025-116S, resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly calling a greater partnership between the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage, Anchorage School District, Anchorage Police Department, and our community at large to keep students in our schools and neighborhoods safe through equitable, community-based solutions to violence. And then we have item 5C7, resolution AR 2025-116 S1, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly calling a greater partnership between the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage, Anchorage School District, Anchorage Police Department, and our community to employ proven solutions to keep students in our schools and neighborhoods safe from violence. And on this item, I believe there is no motion pending. What's the will of the board?
That's one. Second.
Motion to approve the S1, which is AR 2025-116, S1 by Ms. Braga, second by Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Braga.
Thank you. I wanted to start out by, I never really got to speak on AO 2025 holistically, but I really do feel like schools are in a scary crisis right now, wondering what's going to happen with guns. And I was so excited that Mr. Hurt thought he had found a pathway forward. And even though it felt like it wouldn't pass muster with the courts, I think it would have been an interesting test case for communities that are in situations like ours. To start off with also is, I am not an anti-gun family. We hunt, we did biathlon, we had guns in our home. I bought my first gun when I was 21, even though I didn't know what I was doing with it. I thought I was going to hike with a big old Mossberg. Anyway, so I'm not an anti-gun, but I do know that when you look at the numbers of firearm tragedies in Alaska and Anchorage, something has to be done. And as a career educator, I saw firsthand the differences in what the climate in schools were from when I started teaching to when I ended. And those tensions, those problems have only compounded with the lack of state support. When we're looking at possible cuts in counseling, when we're looking at cuts to nursing, when we're looking at higher classes, it gives less opportunities to have that touch point with a student that might be life-changing, might be saving lives in a school. You cannot catch somebody who is in crisis without having the ability to sit down. And I know in busy classrooms with many children wanting to have you listen to their latest story, things get set aside, things get lost. And so I'm disappointed that our state is not stepping up. Another thing that I wanted to go on record with is there was some question if we went forward with the metal detector, helping to supplement those, was this in some way looking to penalize a certain group of students? And so I want on record that the pilot program for our metal detectors that's currently being employed is random. They've been to Wendler, they've been to SAVE, they've been to Golden View, they've been to Eagle River High. They have not even hit the big 3 schools. If they were able to extend it, they would like to just randomly show up with metal detectors, and it would be one of these things where there'd be this, no one knows when it's going to be at your school, everyone walks through it. But the head of security for ASD made it clear he doesn't really like them. You know, it feels very institutional. It's not something that he wants to see, but it has been a great tool. One of the things that he found interesting about the pilot program is some of the weapons that they've caught were clearly kids coming to school feeling unsafe. They weren't coming to school to do something to someone else. They just felt they needed to protect themselves. So we have to put a pin in that. In this process since February when it was introduced, I presented at Chester Park and the Senior Center and 6 different community councils, had meetings with Moms Demand Action, Everytown, the OCS, Alaska Children's Trust. It was something that I worked pretty hard to get some type of comments on what could be done. Neither ordinance asked for weapons to be taken away. I feel like from this process I've learned a lot, and one of the things I've learned, and I'm hoping that someone from Alaska Gun Rights is listening, that if you want to truly have your voice be heard, write your own message, call me. Only 2 people from that group that actually called me, we had very lengthy conversations that were meaningful. They don't see things the same way I do, but just to splat a form letter around is not really a way to make change. So it is my sincere hope that in substituting this AO 2025-25 with AR number 2025-116S1, that we will call on some real solutions to make our schools and communities safer within the existing parameters that we can work with. We'll have meaningful dialogue with stakeholders, more commitment from the state to care, protect, nurture, and help our youth succeed. This resolution, and I want to take a moment to thank Member Martinez for bringing forward a resolution that added some good verbiage that I borrowed for this copy, but it would ask for a public education campaign about gun safety, parental responsibility, coordinated partnership with ASD and APD, violence interruption programming for schools with increased documented incidents of fighting or deadly weapons confiscation, training of school staff on threat assessment and inclusion of students in bullying prevention campaign. I spoke with Alaska Children's Trust, OCS, Awake, Covenant House, VOA, and ended up with Dr. Ashley Goss and Ashley Cecil at ASD. There is only one person in ASD who is trained to be an active threat assessment counselor. And they felt like the need was really in finding some sort of violence prevention, trained to teachers for what to spot, anti-bullying campaigns, campaigning with parents about how to keep weapons safe. And so that's where I'm landing. Currently, ASD, another fact that I wanted to bring forward is 5 SROs short and a sergeant short. Let's see, a call for, I'd like to also call for gun sense legislation at the state legislature and adequately fund schools to the level that allows counselors and nurses to be available at all schools daily. And the resolution adds some medical recommendations of counselor, nurse numbers. And then a call for parents to be partners in promoting a climate of safety in our schools and community. And I talked with Brittany Dunlap, which I believe is the state prosecutor. I have lots of scribbles on paper. So she said that, there really is no way at this point to charge a parent who is not being safe with their weapons. There could be child neglect, there could be reckless endangerment, but with the numbers that OCS sees, there's likely not much could happen. So being better partners, trying to get parents on board is where I think we can make the best use of time. American Journal of Preventive Medicine points to violence as being the leading cause of morbidity and mortality among U.S. youth. In 2020, 86 billion in fatal injuries by youth, and Journal of American Medicine says 122 billion for overall youth violence. Putting money into prevention is going to save us in the long run, and it's going to make our community more attractive to businesses, homeowners, and more importantly, it's going to be the key to building a strong community with youth that are ready to work, lead, and raise their own families here. And I hope you'll support the resolution. Thank you.
Mr. Martinez and Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions that I had to the sponsor was answered with respect to what was the differences between the original resolution, the S version, and to the S1 version. So I think that Member Brummer responded to that. And then just a flag potentially for the administration. We were supposed to be a green dot city, and so we signed on to a compact with an organization, Green Dot Violence Disruptive Bystander Training, and potentially that's a great training framework to revisit around the Green Dot Violence Disruption Training. And just for members to note, there are community organizations working on violence disruption initiatives that are not at the level of our assembly action and discussions. They are happening at a very grassroots level. So if people are interested in where those conversations are happening, I'm more than willing to point you in the direction and connect those conversations as well. And then just lastly, I would note, and I support this, obviously, I introduced an NS version, but I would note that one of the challenges to families of Black and brown descent are that today in our current school district, we still have disproportionate rates of punishment against the children that look like the diversity that we celebrate in our community. We still have challenges in our school district with Alaska Native students being able to celebrate their cultural identity at graduation. So these challenges persist at a systemic level. And I want to make sure that we provide enough capacity building, de-escalation training, and work out some of those structural things before turning the relationship into just not a human development one, but more into a law enforcement one, especially around communities that have historic challenges with the institutions that we hope can help make a difference. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Chair. All for less gun violence and, of course, education. I do have concerns when we start talking about gun legislation. I think we're generally a fairly pro-gun state with all the hunting and so forth. So I'd just like either Member Martinez or Member Baranga to explain in Section 3, it's, I think, both, just a little more on, we further asked for gun legislation that is trauma-informed, focus on education, calls on parental accountability. If you could just describe what you're looking for there, what you see the outcome is, and my concern is while it sounds like a good intention, it's out of our control, and who knows what we might get back in return. Thank you.
So my intention would be that, I hope it was it what you wanted to do it, or?
Well, just for the record, I don't think I included that in my version. So I want to make a distinction, Mr. Salt, that I cannot respond to that particular question. I think there was a distinction between the version that I had and Member Bronx. So I just wanted to make sure that was pending.
Thank you, so I'm gonna grab out. So what I was hoping is that we could count on the state for funding for safe storage, for perhaps dispersing of locks, for potentially fully funding SRO program to allow, I think it's kind of hilarious that at the state capitol they would like to have the metal detector for them, yet we may find that students, rather than all these vestibules we're adding to schools, that one of the things that is pretty clear that school shooters are oftentimes from that school themselves, and they would go right through the safety vestibule, that having random metal detector program might be something that the state can help us with. If we're not going to change how guns legislation is, that's something that the state could do to partner with us. So that's what I had intended with that.
Thank you. And then on the AR, I guess I can ask that question when it gets later, but it talks about non-punitive gun legislation, so that's what I want to explain. Thank you.
I don't know if there's any later, but we're on this side now. So next I have Ms. Brown.
Yeah, I support this resolution, and I appreciate the explanation and the context. And then, I guess just to say, I also appreciate Ms. Baranga's bravery in bringing forward these original ordinances as well. I know that's not what we're discussing right now, but the reality is that we all say we want a safer community, and in this country and in this state, there's very little appetite to talk about actual policy to do that. And so, and I know there's a cost to that, and so I appreciate her bravery, and thank you for having this discussion on the record. Thank you.
All right, is that Mr. Wong?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think along the lines of Member Solt's questions and then hearing Ms. Baranga's response, which I think captured a lot of stuff at a more specific level, I'm going to move to amend Section 3. So lines 18 and 19 to read, we further ask for gun legislation that is trauma-informed and focused on education, period. So removing and calls on parental accountability, because that is, I think, something.
Second.
Yeah, thanks.
So there's a motion to amend by Mr. Horn. First after that amendment. Thank you. And seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Ready, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think the call on parental accountability is a little bit nebulous, and I think we received a lot of testimony when Member Baranga brought forward these original ordinances, both folks for and against, but also folks who were concerned about punishing a parent for the action of a child, and I think we could probably get pretty philosophical on that point. I just don't know that I'm comfortable making that a direct request for that. But certainly, got legislation being trauma informed, focused on ongoing education, and some of the things that Rhonda just mentioned. Yes, we support that. So yeah, for that, we support it.
Good. I think next on the list is Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, actually, I was getting the cue because I was going to make a similar amendment for similar reasons. I was actually going to remove that sentence entirely, largely because, as Carl remember long term, it does feel very nebulous, right? And I am just reluctant generally to say that we will support legislation without fully understanding what it is. And I'll be candid, even if we're talking about legislation that somehow it encourages parental accountability, that is something me personally, I could potentially, depending on how it's done, like get yes to, but I'm not ready to attach my name to that or my vote to that without understanding what the actual piece of legislation looks like, what its goals is, and what kind of checks there are in there. So that put me in an uncomfortable place. In terms of this amendment, yeah, I was going to go a little further to remove that sentence entirely because just saying legislation in such vague terms doesn't really sit well with me, but I would be willing to contemplate supporting this as perhaps a compromise solution because well, Sarah, I really appreciate all the effort that member Ron has put into this. I consider myself fairly pro-gun rights. I also do think we need to be realistic and honest about the hazards they presented. I'll say, previous employment, I have seen more than most of guns to kids, and it's something you never ever want to see. So I'm grateful for my colleague for making clear our community's stance on this and our call for change. So with that, I guess I'll say that I will support this amendment. I'd be open to the idea of going just a little bit further in terms of that section.
All right. So next, I have Ms. Elton.
Thank you. So I support this amendment because it really goes back to, I think, a point that Mr. Martinez was trying to elevate. I've spent, oh my goodness, almost 20 years looking at the school district's discipline data. And the disproportionality in this data has existed for 20 years. I even had a hand in a prior life of rewriting the discipline policy and co-presenting it to the school board, and even that hasn't changed this data. And so I'm worried when we talk about accountability that we that we provide tools to individuals to meet the expectation. What I see in this data is not only a disproportionality of who is suspended in school versus out of school, but overall wide disparities, and it's not just based on race, it's based on your living situation, if you are economically disadvantaged, if you are a student with a disability. It seems like every category we keep track of other than gifted and white has a disproportionality in this data, and it has persisted. And what I find really interesting, and this is where you have to provide people tools to meet the expectation, is the number one in-school suspension incident type is truancy or excessive tardies. And we know that is because we have inequitable busing. And so when we get to consequences around weapons, I want to make sure we are really doing so in the with an acknowledgement of the ecosystem in which we are stepping into. And I am sharing here on record nothing I haven't shared directly with the leadership of the Anchor School District or the school board directly. In fact, when I saw the metal detectors being implemented, I was concerned because one of the first schools they went to was a Title I school that is predominantly BIPOC. And I said, why? Why this school? Why not a school in South Anchorage? Why, why? So I appreciate the amendment because if we want to talk about accountability, it has to come with a concurrent investment to be able to have those tools. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this conversation and thank Rhonda for opening the door to this conversation. Specific to the amendment we have before us, I keep going back to the NAACP letter, which in my mind really framed the conversation and the goal in a succinct way. Essentially, something that is not going to act as a hammer is something that we should consider. And as I look at the different versions of this resolution and look at the verbiage that I think captures that idea in the NAACP letter, the verbiage that comes to mind is non-punitive. And so I'm wondering if the mover and seconder would be amenable to adding that particular language in here before gun legislation.
Non-punitive gun legislation, yes.
All right, so the mover to the amendment and second have agreed to add the term non-punitive before the term gun legislation without objection, and it is so worded. And anything further, Mr. Brewer?
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Ms. Bronca?
Thanks. I just wanted to, I didn't mention this before, but the NAACP, I double checked what my original AO 2025 was, and comments that it sounded like they were not interested in parental responsibility, and I was given a hard yes. We want parents to be a partner in making sure our schools are safe, making sure that students bring their homework. They were looking in my conversations with adding that parental accountability without, punitive measures for the parent, but, leaning in that this is a community, our schools are a community, and we're all part of it. The other thing that I failed to mention is a lot of the language that I added in the S1 came from the NAACP. They asked in that final part that, thank you, I don't have one in front of me, that we had an establishment of a student safety and well-being council. That came from NAACP. And so, I am okay with non-punitive, but no, we can't say what a school will do when they see a weapon, and there are consequences at school if a gun comes to school. And so, if we change this to say non-punitive, are we telling Anchorage School District they can't do their disciplinary policy? And so I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah, I don't know that we have the authority to tell the Anchorage School District what to do without an ordinance. So, anything within this document we consider a strongly worded letter. So that would be the answer. I think that I had a question from Mr. Salt. The question was, can we read back the amendment?
Through the chair, so it's for section 3, line 18 and 19, and the sentence is going to read, we further ask for non-punitive gun legislation that is trauma-informed and focused on education.
Okay, is that good, Mr. Salt? I assume that's good. Mr. Long?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this is, for me, been one of the interesting evolutions of this legislation. And I want it to be really clear for those who may closely track the legislative history and how it's maybe tied together, that evolution from the original ordinances and to where we are now. And I think this amendment does get at, as Mr. Rivera pointed out, is more aligned with the letter from the NAACP. And I think that for me is like one of the disconnects here between the letter of support and what the original legislation would have done, which would have been punitive. It would have made a parent responsible for a student bringing a gun to school, and the penalties would follow accordingly. And so I think from the description of what the NAACP is advocating for, that is different than what the original legislation called for. Maybe not in intent, but in the actual language of that legislation. And so, if we're saying to the legislature, this doesn't do anything to, Section 3 doesn't do anything to describe what the school district should or should not do regarding their disciplinary policy. Of course, they have to follow some statute. But we're asking, okay, our legislators, if you're considering gun legislation in the future, we're asking that it be non-punitive in a way that is consistent with the NAACP's support, but maybe not the original legislation. We're asking that it be trauma-informed, we're asking that it focus on education. And so that, to me, gives the clarity and the specificity, and also the alignment with those who have written in supporting this legislation. And I think also, not to speak for Member Blanca, but also with her stated intent. So probably we can do that first now, but I hope that we can support both this amendment and then also the underlying items.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to be very ineloquent. The title. I know titles are to.
We're on the amendment, right? So is there a comment about the title on the amendment?
Well, no, just the relationship between the amendment and the title, yeah. The NAACP, one of those things that in a previous version to that amendment, this idea of equitable and trauma-informed. I think I will bring that back to the full idea of the full action of the item, but I just wanted to make, I'm going to be looking at an amendment to the title based on this particular amendment in the body of the action.
So, just for expediency purpose, I would ask the members to consider amending their motion to make the parallel language in the title. If that's what you're asking for, so you don't have to go through this twice.
That would be ideal, and Chair, and the reference point would be the distinction between the S version and the S1 version. The title has the difference between equitable community-based solutions, and the other version is employ proven solutions, which is highly subjective and not aligned to the values in the amendment that I'm articulating.
Is there any objection from the members to add the term equitable and community-based in the title?
Do you want to remove that? Can you state, looking at the S1, George, what you would say there?
I could take the lead and just say, I would say, and are equitable, community-based, and it can still be, please go ahead.
Yes, to the point that proven doesn't have to be omitted if it's framed through the lens of the other two values. But alone, proven, for example, could mean wall-to-wall metal detectors and stop and frisk, which would work, but would be devastating, right? So,
okay, so,
thank you.
Yeah, I will change my amendment. Okay. To also include the title, if myself is willing, to employ equitable, comma, community-based, comma, and proven solutions.
So the mover is amended, seconds variable. Alright, so now we have the amendment back before us still for discussion on the amendment. Karen, respond.
I'm so sorry, but I realized I really should have forwarded on, Rosalind Grady had helped with words for this, and here's what she says. Our education committee would like gun sense legislation. We would like to advocate for universal safe storage laws with public awareness campaigns rooted in community trust. support legislative efforts for mandatory reporting of lost and stolen weapons, and push for parental accountability laws that do not disproportionately punish low-income families, but instead educate and equip them with tools and support. And that is after we came out with the resolution. Those were her suggestions.
All right, so all that is heard, and that's your second time on the amendment. So I'm gonna send with you what you want. Any further discussion on the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. Since we're focusing a lot on education and gun safety, I go back to section 1 to show commitment to the student safety by requesting Anchorage Police Department and Anchorage Health Department partner with the Anchorage School Districts and its students to create a public education campaign about gun safety. And then we struck out and kept in parental, added accountability and partnership. I would move that we should say about gun safety with parental partnership to explore the expansion. It's better to include parents into this rather than to say you're accountable.
We're on the amendment.
This would be an addition to the amendment?
So you're moving to amend the amendment, or does the sponsor?
The sponsor agrees.
So we'll restate the amendment a third time. Go ahead. Well, restate your motion.
Well, so I think, if I understand, he's saying, on page 3, section, or line 1, remove accountability, and so it's just gun safety, parental partnership, and to explore the expansion of
I would move before parental, we put with, to include them in the conversation.
Okay, maybe a comma after partnership.
Yes.
Okay, would you read that again so I can grab that?
Okay, gun safety, comma, with parental partnership, comma.
And then right after partnership, comma, strike and to explore the expansion of threat assessment measures. Does that make more sense?
I think, so what I'm trying to isolate is that statement, to create a public education about gun safety, comma, with parental partnership, comma, and the next dot, and to explore the expansion of threat assessment measures.
That would be great. So the amendment is now changed. Counselor, did you get that?
Through the chair, can you repeat that last part?
Yes. Okay. So it's gonna say on line 1, about gun safety, comma, with parental partnership, comma, and to explore,
Clerk notes that she has the amendment. The amendment has been workshopped 3 times. And now the amendment before us. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? I am not hearing or seeing any. I'm going to go ahead again and ask for unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the adoption of the motion to amend? Hearing and seeing no objection to the motion, the amendment is adopted. Is there any further discussion on the motion to approve? Hearing and seeing no further discussion on the motion to approve, go ahead and ask again unanimous consent for the adoption of 5C7 AR 2025-116 S1 as amended. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, therefore AR 2025-116 S1 as amended has passed the body on the vote of 12-0. Now, a motion to postpone indefinitely is in order for the AO 2025-25 and the various other unadopted items.
Motion to postpone indefinitely.
Second. I'm going to go ahead and let Ms. Wong make it, if that's okay.
Move to postpone indefinitely?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Wong, seconded by Mr. Martinez. So, any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll go ahead and ask for unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the motion to postpone indefinitely AO 2025-25 and all the other unpassed items under item 5C? Hearing and seeing no objection, other than AR 2025-116 as amended, the item has been postponed. That S1 has been. So, okay, next we have before us item 5D, I believe. So item 5D is AL 2025-28, an ordinance of the Cambridge Assembly amending Cambridge Municipal Code Section 8.25.070 to require the report of lost or stolen firearms within 40 hours of discovery, including a letter of support from Education Chair from the National Association of Advancement of Elder People Language Branch, or AO 2025 and 2028. The clerk's notice is intended to sponsor and postpone this indefinitely. What's the will?
Move to postpone indefinitely.
Moved by Ms. Ronga, second by Ms. Salzell. I'm going to go ahead and take discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Hearing seeing none, I'm going to ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the motion to postpone indefinitely? Hearing and seeing no objection, the motion carries. AO 2025-28 has been postponed indefinitely. Now we're back on the train. We're going to go ahead and take up item 5E, which is AO 2025-32. An ordinance authorizing retention of tax foreclosed parcels for public purposes legally described as Lot 53, Lot 10, and Lot 23, Lot 3, Laurel Acres subdivision areas 02-493-54 and 012-504-19. The public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone wishing to be heard on this item? Anyone at all? Seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What's the will of the body?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Salto, seconded by Mr. Myers. Ms. Salto? Comments, anyone wish to speak to this item? Hearing seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the motion to approve? Hearing and seeing no objection, item 5E, AO 2025-32 has passed the body on a vote of 12-0. Next, we have item 5F. 5F is AO 2025-33, an ordinance of the Cambridge Municipal Assembly amending Cambridge Municipal Code Title 21, Chapters 21.04, zoning districts, and 21.06, dimensional standards and measurements, and technical corrections, eliminate inconsistencies and address unintended effects of the recently adopted Cambridge Ordinance 2023-103S as amended. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone who should be heard on this item? Anyone at all? Seeing here none, public hearing on this item is now closed. Against the will of the body.
Move to approve.
Moved by Ms. Saltel, seconded by Ms. Frawley. So, we have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion on that? Oh, there's also an S version with this item. Do we move the S version? Oh, that's okay. Here, okay, the other system.
Yes.
So there's the S version. Are there, I have 2 amendments before me. Is there a motion to amend by anybody?
I'll move Raleigh Amendment 1.
Okay, Ms. Raleigh has moved Raleigh Amendment 1.
Second.
Raleigh moves, Ronga seconds, Ms. Raleigh.
Yeah, thank you. So I understand that this is, the intent is to make some corrections and eliminate inconsistencies. And so this proposed amendment, if you look at the, essentially it's a change to height limits. And so if you look in this ordinance, it is changing, the underlying ordinance is changing height limits in 3 areas with R2A, R2D, and R2M. In both R2A and R2D, which are intended to be kind of lower intensity districts, all of these are really allow at least duplexes and some allow small multifamily. Or I think they all allow small multifamily. The idea is changing that height limit to 30 feet. If you look in the original version, it has a number of kind of conditions on, specifically in R2M, around that 30-foot requirement and keeps the 2.5 stories requirement just for that. So in terms of eliminating inconsistencies, this amendment does that. And the rationale is, and I know I brought this up on the record before, for several years, the planning department has essentially gone back and forth, it seems, on whether to allow 30 feet height limits or not, and whether to remove or keep 2.5 stories as a height limit. I remember sitting in meetings in 2017, in 2018, discussing this with planning staff when I was at the Community Council's Land Use Committee, essentially giving us a rationale for why 2.5 stories is challenging. And I'm going to quote, this is from a presentation that was given in September 25th or 2018. I have a paper copy that's been on my desk for, I guess, 7 years. It says, the existing 2.5 story limitation makes it harder for larger lots in the R2M zone to fit the actual number of allowed housing units. My understanding of all of the work around the 3 to 4plex ordinances was trying to solve dimensional standards problems like that. So this ordinance simply says, why not treat R2M the same that we are proposing to treat R2A and R2D, and remove all of the more complicated language around height and transition standards, again with the idea that R2M is of these 3 zones the most flexible zone. So that is what this amendment does, and that is why it is removing several lines of proposed code. Thank you.
Yeah, just, I think 2 pretty straightforward questions, hopefully. Well, first, so we're taking out the 2.5 story building, but the 30-foot height requirement would remain, correct? So that would be the height limitation in the R2M as opposed to 2A and 2D?
Yes, consistent with R2A and R2D.
Okay, thanks. I feel like that makes sense to me. I'm wondering, is anyone from planning perhaps goes to why R2M was different as opposed to R2A and D? I mean, it seems there was a decision made to simplify it in these 2 sections, but not. And I'm just wondering if there's something intentional about that I'm not picking up on.
Through the chair to Member Johnson, Bailey's about planning director for the record. Unfortunately, since I was not around at the time, I cannot tell you exactly what the intent was behind the 2.5 story height limit, but I do believe that it was just at the time, a general approach to limiting heights in a way that was consistent with the character of the neighborhood. We found that is a little bit difficult to enforce, that a 30-foot height limit is much more straightforward.
Okay, I appreciate that. I would think if it's not consistent with the neighborhood, then that logic would apply to A and B as well, but I guess I don't remember those conversations precisely, and I feel like 30 feet works for me, so good enough, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the amendment. I appreciate the simplicity that it brings. I guess I have a question for the planning department as well. So 2.5 stories. Do we have defined in code how tall a story is?
Through the chair to Member Boland, no, we do not.
So a story could be 10 feet, it could be 15 feet. So even within the existing code, it seems like there's a lot of lack of clarity, I will say. And now, I think it brings me, so I also wasn't there for those conversations when the new version of Title 21 was adopted and 2.5 stories was put in there. If I suspected a desired outcome, it would be to not allow for triplexes. Because if you built 3 stories on top of each other, that could house 3 families. It's much harder to do that when you only have 2.5 stories. So there, you lose a floor, potentially you lose the ability to house a family in R2M, which if we go back to our plans, and we look at the definition, the types of housing that are called for in our 2040 land use plan, it makes it very clear that low-rise apartments, townhomes, there's a diversity of housing types that are called for in R2M. So, yeah, I think this just makes a limit more clear. Also, is in alignment, I think, with the original legislation, 2024-103, that triggered this cleanup ordinance. Often there are cleanup ordinances that have to follow just to make sure references are cross-referenced appropriately and that the original intent is further clarified. So I appreciate the department bringing this forward, making some of these corrections, and also appreciate Member Raleigh working for this, and I will be supporting my thing.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing and seeing no further discussion on the amendment, it's probably going to ask in unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment as proposed? I'm hearing and seeing no objections, so the amendment is adopted. Next, in the queue, I have Ms. Salazar.
Thank you. So I have a question to Mr. Schultz, which is, are you planning to move your amendments? And if not, why not?
I'm not, and the main reason being is that I think it was a change that wasn't intended in the initial ordinance that was passed a while ago. Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask a few more questions?
Yeah.
All right. Has the planning department reviewed Schultz Amendment number 1? Do you think it's consistent with the cleanup you're doing in this AO?
I think it could be considered consistent with the cleanup, yes. That section of code actually does not do much of anything. It basically reiterates what's already in the dimensional table. And if asked about that amendment, we would have suggested to strike that entire section altogether.
Sorry, can you say that very last part one more time? I didn't quite catch it all.
If asked about the amendment, if it were to be brought forward, we would suggest to strike that entire section, that item.
The first-story entitlement.
The particular piece that was amended in Schultz amendment. Sorry, let me look it up. Hold on just a second.
Okay, well, we'll leave that for another day and some other cleanup, I think. Because I'm not tracking it. I mean, it seemed like the amendment was consistent with some other policy actions we had taken, which is multiple residential structures on a single lot are permitted in. And the amendment would do, what the amendment would do is say all residential districts. That seems consistent with both the home initiative and our ADU reforms that we've done. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And by striking that section, the section E to C I, section I, then it just removes some confusing section in code. It would not actually be a substantive change because this is already in place in code.
Okay, yeah, this continues to make the argument that Title 21 needs to be written in plain language and not be a bunch of cross references. I'm with Mr. Stolt at the moment, so I think we're going to hold, and I think we need to keep it on the cleanup for next time. Thank you for answering my questions.
Okay. Any, Ms. Brawley, are we in the queue or starting?
Are we on the original item?
We're back on the motions.
Okay. No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on item 5F? Hearing and seeing no further discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for unanimous consent. Is there any objections to the adoption of AO 2025-33 as amended? I'm hearing and seeing no objections on the vote of 12-0. AO 2025-33 as amended has passed the body. Next, we'll go ahead and take up item 5G. Item 5G is AO 2025-34. An ordinance approving proposed levy upon connection made by the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility for submission to the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone wish to be heard on this item? anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing of this item is now closed. What's the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second. Moved by Ms. Salvatore, second by Mr. Johnson. Any discussion on this item? Hearing and seeing none for this item, I'll go ahead and ask for unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the adoption of the motion to approve AO 2025-34? Seeing there no objection, AO 2025-34 has passed the body on a vote of 12 to 0. So I'm gonna go ahead and offer members if they want 5 minutes to go to the bathroom and take care of business. We're gonna go ahead and take a quick break.
Thank you for taking.
You can have a dozen eggs, but I have to limit your purchase to 10.
Right. That's right.
It's an egg.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Trump doesn't. 9.5. Exactly.
And a big long tail.
Big, so it just seems like enough.
Everything else should be like down here, guys.
I'm really feeling you responders, like having this dream take us through. Yeah.
Awkward strangers.
Yeah, you get to it.
Or other option is to consider it.
I don't like those.
No, feel free to think to me, otherwise, that's my other. Yeah, I think here is interesting. Yeah.
Because the thought was like, there's this, and then I've talked to someone actually, like, there's
You like lather at your hands. I just have never used yes, so we've got the whole board, definitely not my Tuesday, I might ask, yeah.
I mean, it's
we're going to be more, I think, but it's ridiculous that I don't know that I'm trying to get out. How are you? Hanging on? I know how that's so you're answer all the questions about your, oh no, we didn't, never mind, sorry. I missed it. So I'm not sure. I'll do
The farmer, yeah.
Excellent. And Dave, see you tomorrow at OUC.
I know that we're on track to be done at 4, so I'm sure we'll
Like unanimous consent, Chris?
Sure. You know, it was nice that he admitted that it'd be nice to not have to do it, but then he also then said, but this is our reality.
There's always time for conversation.
Those boring parts.
It was there at one point, now it's somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there's a
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say ChatGPT created for us a good paradigm for, I feel like you're a little bit question every time I write an AI about contractors, what am I putting in as teachers? Do we think or the teachers? Like, I know what I did like teachers.
I think it's in terms of being
But this one was like, I was like,
Can I come back about another conference and I will email you how you don't find that.
No, they're special needs, it's taking away the learning time of others. You know, you have to make, you want to make all kinds of accommodations to be successful. We had one student that if he got mad, my direction was to evacuate my entire classroom. You know, because I was really terrible at desk seat. And you know, it's like, okay, that was an entire classroom that we didn't do anything. You know, I had to go to there. Would disciplinary measures do anything for that?
It's going to be really exciting. I'm happy to speak.
No, that's.
Scott's, okay. I was thinking about, that course, place on. Yeah, right. Is it?
What I'm telling you, tell me how to tell you.
All right. How close are we to getting back together? Who are we missing? Rob. Mr. Martinez. Right back in.
Yeah, see, okay.
Next up on the agenda, we have AO 2025-35, an ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly repealing and reenacting Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 12.60, tax incentives for housing, repealing Chapter 12.70, tax incentives for affordable and workforce housing. We also have item 5H2, which is AO 2025-35S, an ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly repealing and reenacting Anchorage Municipal Code, chapter 1260, tax incentives for housing, and repealing chapter 1270, tax incentives for affordable and workforce housing. Ms. Ellen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just procedurally, the intention of myself and the administration is to put substitute versions in and continue the public hearing today to accommodate those on the meeting of the 22nd of April.
Substitute version coming today.
I'm aiming for the addendum, and I believe the administration is as well.
Okay, so not today. Thank you. Okay, so the public hearing on this item is now open. Ms. Alton. Does anyone feel ready fire to testify today? We will apparently have an S1 version coming, and so it might limit your ability to testify on the final version. Before we're going to continue the public hearing.
If I can just get up today.
Go ahead. We'll get a mic for you to come on forward, please. Jasmine, you have the clock? Welcome. Welcome. Please state your name, where we're coming from. You'll have 30 minutes.
Hi, Tyler Robinson. I live in East Anchorage, work for Inland Housing Authority, do work all over town. I'm here to generally support the ordinance for tax abatement. I know that you all are still working on some things, but what I want to say is you will always be working on some things relative to this ordinance, so I just want to be here to testify in favor of the general effort to fix some of the tweaks, to make it simpler, to encourage more housing, and to effectively what you're doing here is helping to create a program within the municipality of Anchorage, and I think that's what I want to really focus on. We've had some situations in the past where some of these tools have actually expired without people knowing it because it wasn't sure where this should live within the municipality. So I really appreciate the mayor's office taking this on, and I encourage mayor and the administration to really look, where does this live? Where do these sorts of tools in our toolkit live long-term so that we can monitor them, we can manage them, we can offer tweaks to them, we can report on their effectiveness. If they're too liberal, we can restrict them. If they're not doing enough, we can offer more. We have for years, I appreciate that the ordinance talks about a 2012 housing market analysis. I was here at that time. I remember that study clearly talking about the feasibility gap that we have when we talk about market rate housing, rental housing. And we have every report and every plan since then has sort of indicated that. And so what I want to say is I appreciate your all's willingness to do something about it. You're not going to get it perfect next Tuesday night or whenever you take action on it. That's okay. We have to do something. So thank you for your time.
Before you go, let's start with Ms. Alton's question.
Yeah, thank you. Since you're here and I'm working on an amendment, I'm going to ask you a question. I am contemplating what it might take to make a tax abatement go for 5 stories or 4 stories over ground. That usually requires elevators, non-combustible construction, or heavy timber construction. Kind of in the an additional bonus of 8 years for a total of 30 years tax abatement. What's your impression of that?
I appreciate myself through the chair. I can remember when the tax abatement came up in a previous assembly, and I can remember talking to Assemblymember Weddleton about where should that cutoff be? Should it be 5 units, 8 units, whatever? And I said, well, it actually has less to do with units than it does the actual building type. The building typology drives the cost. I guess all I would say to that is we build a certain type of housing, but we built most of the, or a good chunk of multifamily housing. We would never contemplate that style of development because it is even less feasible than the type of development that we do here today. So if your policy intent is I'm providing a greater incentive because I know that type of construction is even there's an even bigger gap, then I think that's a valid, or I would echo that that's a valid rationale.
Okay, great. That gives me a start. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Welcome. Please state your name, where time from. We'll have 30 minutes.
Yeah, Jason Norris, South Anchorage.
Apologies for the mic is on. Make sure you agree button. Or press the button.
There we go. Jason North, South Anchorage, apologies for misunderstanding this now. In support of this, I think it's a great idea. I would offer a couple of suggestions. I feel like we're making some strange, absolute and relative value statements. Support labor, think labor is great, but the idea that we would pay 5 years of tax abatement for one season's worth of that increment from between market and prevailing wage just doesn't seem like it should be paying more for that than we are 25 years of affordable housing or 25 years of mixed use. So I would just ask that maybe you take another look at that, recalibrate it if needed. I do think that with these increments above 15 years, none of them are actually increasing the supply of housing, which seems to be the underlying thought here. So what I might offer is a year per unit above 8 units, and get you up to 18 for 25 years. And the last is we did repeal parking minimums, and I thought that was a really good move because we recognize we overbuilt parking, but there really is no incentive to convert that parking to housing, and I think that is something that could be really beneficial. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, anyone else here today? I'm not seeing it myself.
We move to continue the public hearing to the meeting of April 22nd.
Second. Motion to continue by Ms. Zanto, second by Mr. Myers. Discussion on the motion. Hearing no discussion, I'd like to ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing no objection, and 2025-35 is continued to the meeting of April 22nd. Next, we have before us item 5I. 5I is April 2025-36, an ordinance to the Municipal Assembly amending the Municipal Code, Chapter 21, Number 5, required conditional use. Approval for pawn shops and certain financial institutions to operate in certain residential and commercial zoning districts. The waiving planning zone. Okay, very good. Now, public hearing on this item is now open. What is, anyone wish to hear on this item? Please come forward. Anyone know? Seeing none, public hearing on this item is now closed. Let's go by.
Move to approve.
Second. Second by Mr. Arlen.
Thank you. So I've been thinking about the issue of pawn shops and check cashing or payday loan operations for most of my time on the assembly, and it is really hard in local governments to limit the interest rate charged or the way in which these type of operations actually do their business. And one thing we do have is our land use. And so the idea here is to use land use through the conditional use process to make sure that there can be a community conversation if a check cashing place or a payday loan or a pawn shop is moving into a neighborhood. It doesn't preclude it, but it spurs the community conversation and lets the community have input on the need for that service or the request maybe for a more traditional financial institution to move into that space. We know we have a hard time getting traditional financial institutions in place. And so what it does is, for me, this is an empowerment tool for communities that often have these, quite frankly, sometimes predatory operations show up in their neighborhoods without any say. So that is the intention. Again, it doesn't preclude it. Conditional use process would be noticed, engagement, and ultimately it would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission to make the decision on whether or not to grant a conditional use permit. I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Ms. Braga.
So would the traditional financial institution require the same community involvement as the payday loan?
I don't believe under the current land use that there is a restriction in the same way where these can be. We've actually carved out a different definition under financial institution to include these payday loan operations, so they would be treated differently than a regular bank.
Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Question from the results. Can you give us a sense of the other ways we use conditional approval in a similar way? And is it a helpful tool, or has it been used negatively in our community as well?
So conditional use is definitely a robust public process. I think it's been used both ways. It has been used to block development as well as to bring development forward. I think, if I'm remembering right, and I'm gonna get these back to as soon as I say it, but marijuana and alcohol both have processes, and I think conditional use is with regard to one of them. Sorry, I'm like, my brain is blanking, but it is one where you could have a business come in, it's otherwise allowable, but there could be negative community impacts, or there could be community impacts. And so that's the conversation, that's how I want to use this tool, is because it is a pretty robust process. It's not without effort and cost, but I think that it is worthwhile because we have very few tools around this particular type of operation.
So just to follow up, essentially the functional impact would be if that payday loan spot on East 6th and Muldoon wasn't there and wanted to come in, walk me through, they would run through the conditional use process, which would trigger the public engagement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Barley.
Yeah, thank you. I support this ordinance, and a conditional use permit is not a no, it really is just extra steps. And I think to the point about alcohol and marijuana, we don't call them conditional use permits, we call them special land use permits, but they're essentially the same thing. To say if you're gonna operate in a community in this location, there's extra and potential extra impacts that it goes through that process. So, and I'll also note this is not something that's in the actual ordinance as a change. But for example, in the R3 zone, it says that a convenience store is conditional use, versus permitted in R3A. I think the difference is one is a mixed use zone, so that's a commercial activity. But that's just another example where clearly at some point we have said putting a store in this neighborhood requires extra scrutiny. And that leads me to, separate from this ordinance, I think there is some value in looking back at the use table and kind of considering where things should be allowed by right or where they need extra process. So that's not today's project, but just to say, for example, maybe we do want to see more corner stores in neighborhoods, and so we should change that conditional use. Again, not this ordinance, but I am interested in the future in kind of stepping back and working with the planning department, looking at the use table more generally and kind of asking those questions. But in the meantime, I think I would say this is a good change, and again, would not stop a place from operating in a neighborhood or any community, just requires additional scrutiny and process.
Anyone else? Seeing nobody, then on this item, we'll go ahead and I'll ask for unanimous consent. Then, is there any objection to approval of this motion? It's the main motion. Hearing and seeing no objection, PO 2025-36 has been approved and vote called to 0. Next up, we have item 5J. Item 5J is AO 2025-37, an omnibus ordinance of Cambridge Municipal Assembly, amending the Municipal Code, Title 7, purchasing and contracts and professional services, updated definitions, clarify information to be reported to the Assembly when seeking required approvals, and subsequent to contract awards and updated competitive solicitation of Assembly approval thresholds and requirements, approved readability and adopt procedures related to grants and payment code regulation. Code of Regulations 7.78 regulations pertaining to grant proposals. Public hearing on this item is now open. Heard on this item. Welcome, please state your name, what part of town you're from, and we'll have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Miranda Walso, and I live in. Good afternoon. My name is Miranda Walso, and I live in Shubiak Eagle River. I support AO 2025-37 and I appreciate the Assembly's work to modernize procurement practices. I urge a yes vote. However, I ask that you strengthen the grant-related provisions to ensure consistent, transparent, and accountable use of public funds. In 2024, the municipality distributed over 20 million in alcohol tax grants alone, more than the combined budgets for departments like Public Works, Internal Audit, the Mayor's Office, and Purchasing. That's not a marginal or symbolic amount, it's a major public investment. And while many grantees are delivering critical services like access to early childhood education, preventing homelessness, and providing trauma-informed care, the process to award these funds must match the importance of the outcomes they support. Recommendation 1, the addition of section 7.90.010, establishing a formal RFP process for grants in code rather than regulation, is a step forward. I urge you to amend the language to require competitive RFPs for all grants over $50,000, the same threshold used for formal contract, competitive procurement, and grant assembly approval. Aligning these rules reinforces the message that all major public spending deserves the same scrutiny, whether distributed as a contract or a grant. Recommendation 2, define acceptable alternatives to competitive grant awards under section 7.90.020. Currently, this provision allows alternative procedures based on what's considered to be in the best interest of the municipality, but lacks definitions or criteria for what that entails. Contrast this with contracts where sole source and open market exceptions are clearly laid out within Title VII. This gap invites inconsistent application and can erode public trust. Recommendation 3, add oversight provisions for grant amendments and multi-year awards. Contracts already require reapproval for funding and scope changes. Grants, by contrast, are often issued without finding deliverables or legal enforceability and rely more on trust and programmatic reporting. Because grants typically lack quantifiable performance clauses nor include recourse for non-performance, the front-end process and standards for issuing them should be especially rigorous. I'm not proposing added bureaucracy or roadblocks. I'm asking for consistency with existing procurement standards and safeguards appropriate for the scale and sensitivity of the funding spent. These changes wouldn't limit innovation, they would protect it by ensuring that all community organizations, not just those who are connected or well-established, have a fair opportunity to access and be aware of grant funding opportunities, and that all recipients are held to the same expectations. In a time of heightened public scrutiny where concerns over misuse of funds or political favoritism are growing, and when many critical public services are struggling to meet demand with limited resources, a more clearly defined and structured process for awarding and amending grants will benefit everyone, grantees, taxpayers, and municipality alike. This will help ensure the Assembly's approach to public spending, especially on non-contractual awards, remains above approach and continues to serve our shared interest of fairness and fiscal responsibility. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Questions for sure? For the, sorry, this, you might email us your comments?
She did already.
I did.
Okay, I'll do it then, thank you.
All right. So anyone else who wish to be heard? Seeing here none, Karen's now closed, let's go.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Ms. Ellenthal, seconded by Ms. Rowley. Ms.
Thanks. So this has been a real collaborative effort with the Chief Administrative Officer, Purchasing Director, Claire from Legislative Services, myself, and Mr. Rivera. What I really appreciated about this conversation isn't just the words on the page, but a lot of conversation from the Assembly's perspective on how pieces move and where we feel jammed up or we think there can be clarity, as well as from purchasing and the administration's perspective about what makes things move smoothly through that side of the house. It's been a long time since we've had that kind of collaboration where we really want to make sure a piece of code is functional for everyone involved. This does modernize the purchasing code. It brings things to a level, not quite up with inflation, but something that at least the three Assembly sponsors felt comfortable with. And I think it really will provide more clarity as we move forward in how we, kind of the information we're receiving and how we get to the decisions that we make. Not too long ago, the purchasing code was really at the heart of a lot of angst and work slowdowns here in the municipality. And so I think this is one of those shared priorities to steal the phrase from the mayor of making sure we have good government. Thank you.
Sheriff Grace, there's no stealing that one. We all go on that. Anyone else wish to speak to this item? Ms. Rowley.
I just wonder, in light of what the speaker shared, is this particular, would that come into this if we were to hold off? Could we add an inclusion of a dollar amount that must go through the RFP process even for alcohol tax?
Yes, it could be delayed, or what I think would be preferable to the people who spent the last many years, year and a half, 2 years working on this, is bring that back as a new project. The proposal, but I think the sponsors who have spent just endless time working with multiple administrations to get this here. So yes, it could be done. Yes, there will be debate against that idea for the purpose of, if you want it, let's bring it back as a separate. Other members? Ms. Barley?
Yeah, thanks. And I don't have an intent to postpone this. Thank you for all the work on this. I know it's rewriting a whole section or a whole chapter is hard. And just two things I wanted to comment on. One is I appreciate the suggestion to have a low threshold or lower threshold for competitive grant awards. I think one challenge that I would mention in the way that this body practices and really what our legislative powers are is that we occasionally do directed grants. And so, many of the things in alcohol tax, for better or worse, were things put in the budget directed to that organization. And so that would be something that would need to be worked out or at least considered because I also appreciate the process, but I think there's reasons why grants are different in some material ways. The other thing is I just want to say thank you for clarifying what our assembly aides are, because I know that's been a point of confusion, contention. Are they employees? Are they contractors? Do they need to have business licenses? My former college student got a business license. For probably the first, maybe only time in his life, unless he goes into his own business in the future. So thank you for clarifying that, because I know it's a little bit of an unusual area since we don't have full-time staff, and that's not what these folks are. But I know they serve a variety of roles. So thank you for putting that in code.
Right. Anyone else? Ms. Elton.
Thank you, Ms. Elton, number one.
Second. So there's a motion to amend by Ms. Elton, seconded by Mr. Myers. Ms. Elton.
Thank you. This just puts the effective date, 30 days after passage, and this is to give purchasing and folks time to implement.
So any discussion on the amendment? Seeing no discussion, we're going to ask for unanimous consent on the amendment. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, the amendment is adopted. Any further discussion on the ordinance? Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask for unanimous consent on the adoption of the motion. Motion is to approve AO 2025-37 as amended. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, AO 2025-37 as amended has passed the body with a vote of 12-0. Next, we have item 5K. Item 5K is AO 2025-42, an ordinance in the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 12.05, to permit finance department to not display or make searchable the property owner's name if the owner requests such limitation. There's also a substitute version, which is reading now. This version is AO 2025-42, S, an ordinance in the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 12.05, to permit finance department to not display or make searchable property under the name if the owner requests such limitation. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone wish to be heard on this item? Anyone at all? Seeing hearing none, public hearing on this item is now closed. What's the will of the body?
Move to approve the S version?
Second.
Motion to approve the S version by Mr. Littlefield, seconded by Ms. Brawley. Mr. Littlefield, want to speak to it?
I do, thank you, Chair. A couple months ago, I had an individual come up to me who was a first responder, and he asked if there was any way that they could protect his family from a searchable database, which Hidden-Way has. From that point, I was a little lost that we didn't have that accessible to those first responders. So, working with our wonderful legal staff over there, we found that there is an AO out there that protects the victims of sexual abuse. That kind of falls right into line with what we want to do here. Our first responders are out there taking care of us. They're in harm's way. They're put in certain circumstances where they really need the protection of this database search. I feel that it is in our best interest to protect those that protect us giving them the option, I reiterate, it's an option, for the peace of mind for themselves and their families. Granted, it's not for every one of these first responders out there, and a lot of them won't participate, but I really think that it's a really good deterrent step that they should have at their disposal. And I would ask my colleagues to support this item.
So, I don't know anyone else that was probably.
Yeah, thanks. And I was happy to jump on and support the original ordinance, and I believe I would support the S version. I just wonder if the sponsor of the S would speak through briefly what the significant changes are.
Can I ask Mr. Hart to go ahead and detail the difference between the main and the S?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, the S essentially just makes two changes to the actual original AO. First, instead of breaking out individual exceptions to the requirement, a property be searchable by name, by individual class of person, it creates a class called protected class, which essentially is an umbrella term that is defined earlier in the chapter, which is intended to, instead of having to piecemeal and create a new definition every time somebody wants to add a new category of person that we think should probably be able to exempt themselves, it enables us to just keep that language in place in statute and only modify the definition. So essentially it's just an efficiency thing. It allows us to only amend one section of code as opposed to having to amend two sections of code in the future. And then second, the other thing it does is that it makes the requirement explicit that the property owner can certify in writing as opposed to the individual person who's a member of the protected classes. The code currently stands, it requires the survivor of violent crime to be the person to attest, which doesn't really seem like a necessary step, especially considering that a child is one of the people that could qualify. So it just simply states now that the property owner would be the one who certifies in writing that a member of their household qualifies as a member of the protected class.
Anyone else? Good.
So I am one of these people who love looking at people. When someone goes, my property taxes are so high, I'm like, well, by golly, they're not that high. No. Anyway, I digress. But what I wanted to say is, sorry, Mr. Johnson. I would say that there are other classes of people. I understand first responders, but public servants, in a way, if you're holding elective office, I don't know if that is possible to be included. I mean, you make decisions that make people angry at times, and you know, where do we draw the line? You know, a teacher that's students that don't like the grades they get. So yeah, go ahead.
So if you look at the S version, what Mr. Hurt just suggested, if you look at page 2, line 18 through 29, it essentially creates a mechanism by which new protected classes can be added very simply and very cleanly. And so instead of that paragraph as it was above, we broke it out into category A and category B, which means thus the category C, D, E, F, and I could be added depending on the will of the body. And so I had another member whisper, what assembly member is there, or the mayor? And the answer is with some analysis required. Legal department, probably yes. And so, but we created the structure to make that feasible through the S version.
I appreciate that's a good plan.
Ms. Ellis.
Thanks. I won't be around to add any categories, but I would caution in really thinking through those categories. Elected officials are already disclosing their addresses in other forums around their financial disclosures. There are other requirements that may preclude adding certain individuals, although the instinct is right, perhaps, or the instinct is there. It should definitely be done with good care.
Yeah, and I said with counsel because you never know until the attorneys have really looked at it whether or not it's a valid inclusion. So, but yes, we put the framework together. Anyone else on this side? I think Mr. Littlefield, he heard a whisper from over here that said this is an elegant solution to a proposal that came before us a few years ago. So this takes it to the next level. And there's no further discussion. I would like to ask for unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the adoption of the motion to approve it 2025-42S? I'm hearing and seeing no objection, thus the item is adopted on a vote of 12-0. Next we have item 5L, which is AO 2025-44, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 21.01.080 to adopt the municipality of Anchorage long-range transportation strategy as an element of comprehensive plan code and zone. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anyone wish to be heard on this? Welcome. Please state your name, what part of the town you're from. We'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Jason Norris from South Anchorage, supported this. I think it takes some really good steps to address. It is on.
Okay, sorry.
I think it takes some really good steps to address the problems that we've been seeing as of late. I know that the Assembly had taken a resolution on pedestrian safety, and we're trying to address that through a number of means. I think establishing a modal hierarchy is a really good first step in getting after this problem. And I think that the target shares of trips is appropriate. I did hear from someone who wasn't as much in favor that they found these shares aggressive. And I thought that was an interesting term to use because plurality of trips is still personal vehicles, and yet it's still seen as an act of aggression. I think it goes a long way to describing the kind of situation we find ourselves in culturally around transportation. Now, we really do need to do more to not just encourage or make safe, but make attractive non-vehicular travel. So I would say that there's been a lot of talk about shared responsibility and how drivers need to put down the devices and pay attention, which I agree with, and that pedestrians need to be responsible, which I agree with. But the one person or one class of people that don't seem to be brought up much when it comes to shared responsibility is the engineers designing the system. And so, and that's no slight to my friends, the engineers. I know that they work with the manuals they have, but we really do need to change the way we design our system. And I think that this starts to get after that and establishes some good priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the side who's here? I don't know. Seeing none, public hearing is now closed. Let's move body.
Move to approve.
Move by Ms. Tell us goodbye.
Thank you. So this has been a long time coming. Back when Mr. Weddleton was on the body, he and I brought forward the first funding to make this happen. So it's really important to me that we take this item up before I leave, which will be more than 3 years. But in the 3 years plus, there's been really great community engagement around this long-range transportation strategy. In code or per code, one of our legislative powers is to adopt a local long-range transportation plan. Throughout my time on this body, that long-range transportation plan has been the Metropolitan Transit Plan, really the plan written by the state that focuses on the state's priorities and needs. And I have undertaken on behalf of the body a number of times extensive comments to the MTP, most of which are ignored and don't get incorporated. But one of the things about AMAX, should you have the great privilege to serve on AMAX, is you learn that local plans have to be taken into consideration. But it's hard to have your local plan taken into consideration if you don't have a local plan. I think you all see where I'm headed. So this is called a long-range transportation strategy. I think in the future it should probably be named to the long-range transportation plan. But right now it is a strategy because it is goals and objectives, but it doesn't necessarily have a bunch of action items. So I'm willing, it's a step in the right direction. And I think that's really important. What really catalyzes this now, and I appreciate the public testimony, is we've had a rough couple of years, like with pedestrian deaths, with safety on our roads, And I think that it is time to get serious about that. I think a couple of ways to get serious about that is local planning and efforts and making sure these plans are considered. We're about to undertake a targeted comprehensive plan review, and having this be our transportation strategy in that targeted plan review, I think is very important. I think it's really important to set things like load share goals to talk about what are we encouraging, how are we making investments to further those goals? Are we investing enough in our public transit system? Are we making sure that when we build roads that pedestrian or multi-use pathways aren't just amenities? They're actually integrated pieces because it fits with our strategy. So I want to give thanks to the planning department for getting this through, and to Mr. Downing for making sure it didn't fall too far off the radar. It's really important that we take responsibility and do our own transportation planning. Anchorage is a complex transportation network because of the intersection of so many state roads, local roads, and frankly, not quite fully developed roads. So I would really appreciate your support for this. I have a cleanup amendment. I'll go ahead and move Zalatow amendment number 1.
A motion to amend by Ms. Zalatow, second by Ms. Warren.
Thank you. This is kind of a cyclical amendment that we can clean up any scrivener's errors, typographical or grammatical conforming amendments can be made. As we did with another plan, the idea is that the changes will be in a separate document listed, and then those changes will come back by informational memorandum to the assembly, just so that you can check off that nothing got changed that wasn't supposed to get changed. It was truly administrative work. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing seeing none, go ahead and ask for unanimous consent or any objection to the amendment be adopted. Hearing and seeing no objections, it is amended. Next up is Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I certainly share Member Zalatow's enthusiasm over this plan, and for me, it sort of feels like a full circle moment too. I think in my first budget cycle, Member Zalatow and I moved an amendment at the request of the planning department, and then got broken apart into 2 separate studies. One on best practices in snow removal, parking management, and right-of-way management. That is still underway. The other piece was this, the long-range transportation strategy. And I'm really, I think, appreciative of the fact that this is something that was the planning department had early over, because in much of the public testimony that we hear, Members Zalatow and I, and Littlefield and others who served on the AMAS policy committee, a lot of the public testimony revolves around the fact that we need to do a better job of tying land use to our future transportation goals. And I think that this does that. I also think the strategy, it embraces a willingness to be innovative. And I also appreciate the efforts that were made on the front end to bring in a diverse roster of perspectives and demographics to this plan, including facilitating my request to have some folks from Mountain View included in this planning process. So bringing in some new, fresh voices and fresh perspective is one of the ways I appreciation for that. And so, yeah, I will be supporting this strategy, and I think it will be a very helpful tool for myself and other AMAS policymakers or any assembly members who are interested in transportation, transit, infrastructure. Just a good guide for some of our decision making. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, next I have Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to move Holt Johnson amendment number 3.
So there's a motion to amend by Mr. Salt, seconded by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Chair. So what this amendment does is it brings back in the 2010 Hillside District Plan into the table referenced. just to make sure that we recognize the use that we do use AMAX funds on the hillside for the life and safety service areas such as the Mountain Air Extension is a good example, and I encourage members to support this amendment. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Dawn? So I don't see anyone. I have a few questions. So to the sponsors, in particular, it's on the last page, second to the last page of the packet, with number 4, 9D and 9E. What do those mean?
I'll take a stab at it. At least there's policy 9D has some familiarity with this. There's been a long-standing request from the community that for the section of the Old Stewart Highway, I believe we're speaking with that piece that runs adjacent to Park Marsh, that if that when and if that road is rebuilt, that it becomes more of a multimodal transportation corridor, right? Right now it's not well suited to pedestrian or bicycle traffic, but the community has long expressed that when a project moves forward in that area, that it should accommodate those uses. So I think that's at least part of what's trying to be captured there. And then 9E, I mean, this comes over from the Hillside District Plan, which is an adopted neighborhood plan. So that's where the language came from. I don't think there's anything that myself and members are changing in there. But to be honest with you, I have to look a little bit deeper to understand more of what the guy in that 9E was.
Do you have any sense of what that means, Mr. Soul? Mr. Gates, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, I was on mute.
There we are. Sorry, it's all good. First one.
Yeah, so I think 90 is, appreciate it. 90 is around, if we expand things like ARTSA or other entities on the hillside, that we avoid projects that would increase problems on substandard parts of existing road systems. So a good example of that is, actually there was a real good one in Girdwood, but like Birch Road, there's a project out there that basically redoes Birch Road because of the way that road was designed. It's over like $1 million a mile for that project. So we would not want to kind of relive or recreate the sins of the past and hold some of these roads to standards that don't fit the hillside characteristic because it'll be cost prohibitive. Thank you.
So, just like a more refined question, is there a project to develop a hillside road management entity? Is there such one existing, if not intended to design it, or what is that? Right, what are we talking about here? And so, but Meg might have an approach or an answer to my general question. I'm just confused. So
Yeah, so where this amendment goes in the plan is Exhibit A. Exhibit A is a historical recitation of what are in these plans. It is not a commitment or an otherwise prioritization of particular projects. It just calls out what's been in the plans that have historically been adopted as part of the comp plan, because this is all about the intersection of transportation and the land use plans. So if these things are all related to transportation and in the Hillside 2010 Hillside District Plan, they can be referenced because it's just the history that then leads into Chapter 2, which starts to go into the strategies and the implementation areas.
all right, it's confusing a bit to be taking a vote on an entity, the establishment of an entity that I don't know exists or does exist since 2010. I'm okay with it in the context of the historic intersection between the various plans. That's not a problem. I just feel like there's a language gap between then and now. Something is missing. So, Mr. Gates, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to put it in context, I guess, in Vice Chair Rosales to
There's page 529, that exhibit that just is over the past 4 years it's adopted. And there's excerpts that used to the last terminal. Pieces of that plan related to participation. And so it's already adopted as 2020 and 22. It's just quoting from it.
All right. Anyone else on the amendment? Ms. Farley.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate the explanation, and I do see, I was looking back through that list of plans, I mean, certainly the Hillside District Plan was adopted as part of our, is an element of our comprehensive plan, so it makes sense to include it here. I will note also, I was just flipping through, most of the policies and strategies and objectives, there's kind of different terms being used per plan. All of them are really kind of above the level of an individual road project or intersection or trail. For the most part, I did see reference to the coastal trail. I saw reference to the Seward Glen Highway connection, but generally speaking, not kind of specific roads. Not to say that those plans don't speak to more specific areas, but I guess I'm going to move to amend the amendment to strike policy 9D, not because I understand that's in the plan. I'm just trying to be consistent because we're not replicating every aspect of every plan. And as I said, there's a couple other examples, so I just want to have a discussion about whether we should put individual examples in this plan or not.
Second.
Motion to amend, Ms. Farley, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Farley.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped right to the description, so that was what I was going to say. Thanks.
Chair.
Okay, Mr. Schultz.
Would it be easier if the mover and seconder agreed?
Yeah, what would then occur would be, we would just ask the original motion to be everything except policy 9D. So.
I concur with the motion amendment to amend as stated.
And a second.
I'll concur.
All right, so Madam Clerk, then the amendment would be everything contained in the draft amendment number 3, barring policy 9D. And I'll briefly speak to that. I think that was kind of the gist of my question. It's like, by putting these in here, one, does it grant them special consideration because they're specifically called out, separate from the plan itself, which is called out? Does it raise it up as a priority first? And second, what about all those other priorities? And third, on that one in particular, I think the whole gist of the plan is multimodal facilities serving the community, right? And so in some ways it is also that. So I think that's a one. Any further discussion on the amendment? And seeing none, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to adoption of the amendment. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, that amendment is adopted. Any other amendments? Okay, are there any other amendments? I'm seeing here no other amendments, and so now we're back on the main motion. Ms. Parga, is you want to
Thank you. I was looking at page 11, the goal to maintain exist transportation infrastructure, and I don't specifically see the repair of pavement problems. It's snow clearing, gravel sweeping, fixing drainage, striping, landscaping, but along the main corridor, we have these alligator cracks in the center, and really calling out keeping up on tarring. I don't know if I'm just not seeing it, but in some way, I almost feel like we need the same pothole reporting mechanism for bike trails, that someone knows who to contact. You just get in there and click, and put the coordinates of where this big crack is, or where there's a tree in the trail. So that's one thing I noticed. And then the other thing is, it's further down, and And this looks like it's just a worksheet, so let me just find the page. Oh, on page 22, treat resolving path conflicts as priority. And it says, Zach, what do we mean by this? And maybe there's maybe I'm looking at an old page, and there's a newer one because I've done that once already today, but I'm wondering what that does mean. And then the last thing that I wanted to say on that is the striping, and that's the third thing on page 20, or the fourth thing. I really hope that we can get to some of that striping this summer. That horrible e-bike accident was from someone not being on the right side of the trail, and I think we can solve some of those conflicts by making sure that corners for sure are striped. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Wall next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So goal 2 on page 11 is maintain existing transportation infrastructure. Improve, fix, and use what we have first. And then under that, M2, I think calls out specifically what Member Rock is getting at. And that's to prioritize structural maintenance. So things like striping, landscaping, and maintaining or fixing drainage. And this actually goes a step further, which speaking my prior point about the willingness to be innovative, and also trying to bring sort of our infrastructure back in balance. This calls to do that first for people walking, rolling, and biking. So that infrastructure that's in need of repair for those user groups, this actually prioritizes, which I think is very interesting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, if I suss that correctly, then you're saying it is in there, it's just not already stated. Any further discussion? Any motion? Ms. Elton.
Yeah, thanks. So the planning department asked me to run that amendment about typos. I think you found one. Okay, so I didn't want to leave that unanswered. Okay. Yeah. So what do we mean by the stack? It wasn't a thing in there, so. So that was
the comment.
Yeah. So it will be taken care of in the final file.
I don't know, it'd be fun to put that in the code.
Yeah.
All right, so any further discussion? Go ahead, Ms. Wong.
I just want to pivot back to that M2. If you didn't have the slash between maintaining, fix, and drainage, when I read that, it's like we're going to maintain and we're going to fix the drainage, but not. I don't read it as maintain the trail in rideable condition. I read it maintain the drainage, but that's nitpicky, but I want to make sure that's. I get a lot of messages about trail problems.
Yes, we see those with you. Anyone else? Is there any action? Okay, then seeing here no further inputs or actions, we'll go ahead and ask for unanimous consent on the approval of the motion. Motion to approve AO 2025-44 as amended. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, thus AO 2025-44 as amended has passed the body and vote 12-0. The next item we come to is not a public hearing item. It's back at the beginning of the agenda, item 4A. Ms. Alto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is a continued item from a previous meeting where you found that I had a conflict of interest, so I would ask to be excused.
Yes, you are excused. So next up we have item 4A. Item 4A is Assembly Memorandum 323-2025, Amendment 3, intending for the operation of warming center location for the municipality of Anchorage. I don't see any action under it is continued, I guess, or postponed from the meeting, our last meeting. So what is the rule?
Move to approve.
Moved by Ms. Body, seconded by Ms. Martinez. Before that, though, we'll go ahead and lay on the table. I'll read for you AIM, a numbered 2025 Mayor's Office, 2024 to 2025 Warming Center Operations Update, and we'll direct clerk these correct descriptors are entitled, or excuse me, the subject of the memo, operations systems. So,
Fresh copies.
right.
Anyone?
Yeah, and so we'll just make sure that gets into the final record. And so, Mr. Moore.
Okay, so I'm going to move an amendment. So I think I'll start in sort of the new section on line 29 above what's there now. That extension of the contract, and over the delegate suggested. So extension of the contract is contingent upon the contractor utilizing HMIS data. Utilizing HMIS. As a contractor participating in HMIS.
So there is a motion to amend by Mr. Wong, is there a second? I'll second it. Second by Mr. Rivera. I'm feeling all about that. So generally speaking, across all the domains of our work in the home space, we require our contractors to utilize the HMIS system. This contract did not require it in the beginning, and there are some absolutely amazing assertions made in the memo, like 1,381 unique individuals served, but there's no way to validate that because there's no data management required under this contract. And so what this would do is just require the participation, like the organization, the contractor already does for other programs. This would just standardize this contract to the other ones that we have. So that's the purpose of the amendment. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I think I support this amendment, and it seems straightforward. Not to say that my feelings are necessarily contingent upon the administration's response, but just since this would be an action that we would follow the administration to implement, I just want to see if there's a problem or concern here that I'm not foreseeing.
Your Chairman Johnson, I've talked with our real subject matter experts on this issue, and they confirmed that it's on and it's doable for this requirement to be added to the contract.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Bowman? Okay, anyone else? So on the amendment, I would like to go ahead and ask unanimous consensus or any objection to the adoption of the amendment. Seeing here no objections, so the item is amended. Mr. Bowman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like, I think, to invite Thea and Karina up here because I have some questions for you. We had the opportunity to have a dialogue with some of the downtown community council folks, the radicals, other interested parties. I do want to give a shout out on the record to Sylvia, who's the president of the Downtown Community Council, for helping me facilitate that sort of a listening session, and really want to voice strong appreciation for the administration for attending and listening, and also for Director Rash attending as well. In that conversation, so I think what I heard pretty clearly from the administration is that you feel it's important to keep the Warming area open for a time being because it's an important place to be able to connect folks to services, a place where folks will reliably come back to, and we have funding that's coming in to help assist folks with housing. You feel like that's sort of the most streamlined way to move folks in housing with that funding is to have the interface at the Warming area. And so I kind of want to get to a yes on this because I want to make that easy. I do have, I think, a couple questions and maybe a couple concerns. One of the things that we talked about in the meeting was what could we do to mitigate some of the public safety issues within the perimeter of the Warming area, because the contractor, they're sort of responsible for what happens on premise and not around the premises. So wondering if maybe you had the opportunity to chat with APD or other entities about what could be done. I guess that would be question number one.
Through the chair, Member Bowman, thank you for the question and thank you for scheduling the meeting with the Downtown Community Council. It was really nice to hear their kind of feedback. First and foremost, in understanding that downtown has had a significant kind of impact on where and how we see individuals that are experiencing homelessness being in that area. One thing that I committed on the call and committed with you in a separate conversation is to really work with both the Downtown Community Council president and heading to find a resolution towards the good neighbor policy. I think that is going to be one of the first steps in creating some level of safety, is finding a middle ground between those two entities. And then second, there's ongoing conversation with APD about how do we increase our presence in downtown, understanding that we have the downtown revitalization, and both for our east downtown as well as our town square, it continues to be a priority for the administration in seeing a safer area for everyone, and particularly understanding and recognizing that we're coming into the tourist season.
And through the chair, this is Member Bond. In addition to kind of our general approach of wanting to have that increased presence downtown and in other high traffic areas like Midtown and Mountain View, tomorrow we're meeting with the chiefs of fire and police to have a conversation kind of broadly around our crisis response system and really adding in, when we think about our mobile response, our engagement with vulnerable individuals that are either on the street or in public places. So as you know, we have a number of different mobile tools such as our safety patrol, crisis response teams, including MIT and MCT. And we've been actively talking last week and this week around how do we kind of really increase that presence in those high traffic areas of town, as well as kind of some new procedures about how to engage with people. So, as you know, in the past, Safety Patrol's been around kind of involuntary engagement. And we're working with the fire department, with the contractor to be in a situation where, like, do you need help? Can I help you? Can I take you to warming? Can I take you to shelter? You know, so trying to kind of develop that approach. So we will have more specifics on that after we've had some of those more internal meetings, but that's the direction we're on here.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Thank you very much. My next question is, so both in the Zoom call that we had with the downtown folks and in our prior discussion on this topic on the dais at our last regular meeting, the question was asked, do we need to go all the way to June 30th? Is there any appetite to go maybe to March 30th or have a shorter duration? And then if we need, well, if we're seeing that the capacity, May 30th, if the capacity is still there, people are still utilizing the warming area, because folks might not, they might decide to go camp out because it's warming up and maybe that's where they want to be. And so, and just to think of, our limited funding, right? Thoughts on instead extending the contract to May 30th and then bringing back a separate item should it arise for to all the way to June 30th.
Through the chair, Member Boland, thank you for the suggestion. We did have an opportunity to talk about this, and we would be okay with what we would actually ask for is the authorization through June 30th with the opportunity to come back to the assembly and identify utilization if we see utilization is winding down. We have the opportunity to work with the vendor. We've already had conversation about this, that if we don't see utilization demonstrating the ongoing need, particularly with this being coupled with the emergency rental assistance that's coming through, then we would wind down the service. It creates less administrative burden if we're authorized and then just have the ability to communicate with the assembly that we are going to wind down the contract based on utilization. But that would be our ask, is to authorize through June 30th, but recognizing that we would come back to the body and wind down the contract based on utilization earlier than the June 30th date.
Okay, so heard. I do think that we need to have some kind of a requirement for you to have information back on this. So what I would like to see is an information memorandum presented by May 20th with a report on utilization. And I think we have just to put that in. I think we should put that in the memorandum here, just so it's clear and nobody forgets. So I guess I would move to amend this again to say that the extension of the contract requires an assembly information memorandum presented to the assembly no later than May 20th on utilization of the warning area.
Second.
Motion to amend by Mr. Vaughn, seconded by Mr. Martinez. Did you get the language, Kirk? Okay, so any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Rivera, are you seeking the cue?
I guess operational question. Maybe to the clerk, or maybe Mr. Chair, did we already dispatch with the amendment on HMIS?
I think we did by unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to speak on the amendment. I support it. The real question I want to make sure we answer here on the record is what I think you just said. I want to make sure it is accurate that the extensions that are going to be offered are going to be, it's authorized through June 30, but we'll extend it through May, end of May, and at the May 20th period, we'll review utilization, and you will make the decision if warranted for that last 30 days or 15 days, however you want to do it, right? Is that a fair statement?
To the chair, that is correct.
Mr.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate diving into this. And I appreciate you saying it's a fair statement. Does the contract allow this to happen? Because we can say our intent all we want, but unless the contract actually says, yo, municipality, you can turn this off when you want, then our intent is sort of somewhat meaningless. So please confirm that the contract actually allows us to do this.
Through the chair, Member Rivera, I'm going to call up Director Rash.
Kimberly Resch, English Health Department. So there are clauses in all of our contracts that does say that we can terminate a contract based on certain rules through purchasing. So those are in this current contract. We just have to get so many days before that closure of the contract.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they could make the extension any amount of time. I'd like to ask for a motion to send the meeting by 10 minutes. Motion is spent by Mr. Brown, 10 minutes or a second. Ms. Brawley, I'd like to ask unanimous consent and objection to the motion. If there's no objection, we're extended for 10 minutes. Then we're back on the amendment. Mr. Rivera was in the queue. You're done. Mr. Bowman.
Okay, I can't find it now, but I guess the last thing that I would want to voice, I think there was a, wasn't there a, did you guys lay on the table?
Yes.
And then, okay, perfect, thank you. So this is sort of the rationale for this. Thank you for providing this. I think I just want to express my own personal concern with, in the conclusion, warning centers have become a critical layer of Anchorage's homelessness response. And I guess what I would like to see is that we aren't dependent on warning areas. I think that they have become sort of a piece of the puzzle because we don't have adequate housing or shelter capacity. And so we have these sort of stand-up locations, but they're, one of the interesting things that I think we heard in the downtown community folks is there was a comparison to the way that the Brother Francis shelter used to operate when they made everybody leave after a certain time. And the community impacts of that versus now, where the Brother Francis shelter is doing a great job and folks are able to have a safe place to be overnight. And I think that hearing from the downtown folks say this is a much better model, I think that's instructive for us. And so I guess just voicing two things primarily that I hope we move away from having to use one newsletters in the future because we have no capacity. And then number two, I hope we get a jump start. I know that the administration is very hard on homelessness response and all the many facets, and that it feels like a tough hill to climb sometimes. But I just hope we have that conversation earlier about where the loan areas are going to be if we need them for this coming winter. Thank you very much.
So I have one concern with the memo. So have you validated these numbers? Has the department had an opportunity to validate these numbers anyway?
Chair, we have worked with our third-party oversight to work with the vendor on collecting this data, but because they are not required to use HMIS, they've been able to cross-reference only those individuals that voluntarily completed a coordinated entry assessment. So of the numbers, we have about 450 plus individuals that were cross-referenced into the HMIS system.
Right, and so what this memo reads like is that these are your numbers. These are the department's numbers. So don't read like these are unaudited numbers submitted by a vendor, you know. And so I find that the number 1381 unique individuals just stretches the veil of credibility to a very thin point. I'm not going to say too breaking, but I just think that by this coming from the department, in the form that it's in, it is an assertion by the department that these numbers are factually correct. And so I have some concern with that, only because I think that before I would assert numbers like this, I would want some auditing procedure established to make sure, because while we're not paying on utilization per se per unit per capita, paying as a whole, it's hard to narrow in. And I understand and I agree, and I'm grateful that the numbers, the administration agreed to the application of the HMIS question, which will hopefully get us to the point where we can validate them independently, or at least through a mechanism that is third-party validated. So I just have that concern. But otherwise, my neighbors are concerned, want to express their concerns. I am confident that this is working too. So, is there anyone else on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, then on AM 323-2025 as amended, and we'll go ahead and ask members for unanimous consent and objection to the motion.
Through the chair, we're on the amendment right now.
Oh, we're on the amendment. I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I was giving you a point. Is there an objection to the adoption of amendment? The amendment adds, would you restate the amendment? It says the contract. Right.
Through the chair, correct me if I'm wrong, Member Rowland, but I got the extension of the contract requires an assembly information memorandum presented to the assembly no later than May 20th on utilization of the Walnut location.
Yeah, that captures it, yes. All right, so there's the motion. Mr. Myers, thank you for capturing that. Is there any objection to the motion? Motion to hearing and seeing no objection, then the motion amendment is adopted. Next, we're back on the main motion as amended. And I'm going to ask unanimous consent if there's someone else who wishes to speak. So is there an objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, and 323-2025 as amended has passed the body, which concludes our business agenda for the day, which is amazing. Ms. Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to give the members a quick heads up about something you should anticipate receiving from the administration later on today, and which we'll offer a briefing on tomorrow morning at UOC. And that is a waiver of Title VII to allow for emergency procurement to go forward. A contractor needed to address explosive levels of methane gas at Merrill Field, which is being emitted by the landfill that's beneath the airport. And so this is something that description probably sounds very frightening. This is something that has been ongoing to a certain degree for the last several years, but it's reached a point where we have had levels noticed within buildings, and also where the Department of Environmental Conservation has started to raise concerns about our ability to continue to safely operate. And so they are urging us to make sure that we are able to move forward with some corrective action this summer, and that isn't sufficient time to actually go through an RFP process in order to procure the contractor needed. So I just wanted to flag that here openly right now, and you'll receive further notice, including the executed waiver from the mayor this afternoon. And to the extent there are questions or further feedback to hear further details, we've already asked for time on the IEOC meeting tomorrow morning to be able to address those. So I just wanted to state that on the record here today. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just 1 second. I guess what we'll do now is move on to participation and remove the public should be heard. Welcome, please state your name, where you're coming from. We'll have 3 minutes.
All right, hi. Jamie Lopez, East Anchorage, from the Coalition for the Homeless. I think I prefer sitting in the chair. The podium feels a bit like a soapbox and a rest. So 14A, the Learning Center is essentially part of the strategy to try and provide rental assistance to people that are sheltered. Obviously, the people that are 14 days away from homelessness, they're probably going to get covered because they have internet capability to get places to talk to providers. But the vast majority of people that are outside, the main issue is this. A lot of people in this room, they don't have lived experience. They don't have not faced adversity at the level of survival. And so the best way to describe it to people that don't understand it is, say you're military, you're deployed to a foreign country, you're on a forward operating base, you're getting bombed every single day, your supply line is cut, and then after a period of time, your perimeter is getting breached day after day after day, and things are coming in at all times, all hours, and it hits you and it hits you again, and then people start scaling your stuff on the way up, and so you're fighting a constant battle, and then, maybe get an airdrop or two with providers that show up and every couple of days, but it's a bit, sort of like safari or a tourist season where you never depend on it, and the PTSD just racks up and up and up. And so the general point of this nature is that you're dealing with broken people, and people that are broken, you've been out there so long, they turn into a feral state. Some turn to drugs, some just don't mentally come back. It's the same thing with Vietnam and other things as well. And so if you're trying to target people that are in a learning shelter, they have years of pent up things, and if you're providing short-term rental assistance, maybe say it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, they're dealing with things that they've had built up for a period of time, and it's not going to be very easy for people to acclimate and reintegrate back into society based on what's there. So it's one of these things where it's maybe a good idea on paper, but when you're starting to deal with people, they have issues. Other things that I might talk about in the 42 seconds that I have left. So obviously, people are outside. They're going to be outside for part of the summer. HMIS, when I left Coalition, I came to the conclusion it's about data collection to get the grant funds, to pay the salaries in the home office. And a few lucky people got get help along the way. Those kinds of people. But the vast majority don't. And so after a period of time that they keep on checking in on the wait list, some just stop coming up to the table because they lose hope and they don't think they're going to get it. So the numbers are higher. And aside from that, I hope that Amy tries to help people that are outside this summer because they're going to be a lot of people outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other member of the public who should be heard? Right, round one to the summer member comment. About 2 minutes, just continue.
No additional comments. No comments.
No comments.
Thanks, Chair. First up, I want to thank everyone for passing AR 2025-116 S1 with amendments, and I failed to thank Members Altel for the help she did for leading me to how to move forward. I also wanted to call out, at our last meeting, we did Education Sharing Day, and it was lovely. We talked about a rabbi that had done much for education, and I wanted to shout out Mahmoud Darwish today, a Palestinian poet and author. He has passed out 3,000 scholarships, and the motto of his center is "Education is sacred," and they realize in Palestine that it's a gift that cannot be confiscated, demolished, or occupied. Thanks.
Thank you, and Ms. Marley?
See you tomorrow, thanks.
Mr. Johnson?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Bowman?
No comments, yeah.
Mr. Meyer? Coalition thoughts on the phone, Mr. Salt? On the phone, Mr. President?
Nothing to answer, thank you. No comments, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'll just say, marathon work, we got through a ton of work. We have another marathon agenda on the 22nd. We'll be somewhat divided between two assemblies, but there'll be a lot of work to get done before certification. So let's keep the pace, and in light of the education and sharing day, I'll just say to those of you who practice, it's happy Passover in the middle of it, and that's what the rabbi was essentially celebrating, and with that, we will stand adjourned. Congratulations, everyone.